Oh, fair. Hey, Florencia.
I mean, I was setting up the live stream, so I'm going to.
Hey, you're on mute. Or I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I can hear you now.
Okay. No,
How
I was
are
doing
you?
I think we're live stream now, so you know.
Oh, that's cool.
But I don't know if I cannot stop it. I cannot pause it.
That's fine. We're just kind of putting our lives on parade.
Yes. So so you know, we're live.
Sounds good. We're live. Good to know.
No, because sometimes I'm afraid that it's not going to work. So I wanted to do it before we begin.
That's great. How's it going? It's good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. You know, midterm review, half the summer. Half of the summer.
Yeah.
If you're here, that means that I gave the right link.
You did. At least I think so. Oh, there's Nate.
Okay. Let me see who's there. Oh, I'm going to turn off because I'm looking at the YouTube also. So I'm going to close it. I don't get issues with sound. Hi, Nate.
Hi, how are you?
How you doing?
Hey, Nate.
Welcome. Okay, let me check on something. I'll get back. That's Jeannie, our first student. Hi, Jeannie. Okay, hold on 1 second. Let me just get.
How you been, Nate?
I'm good. We have a 3-week-old here.
What? You just had another baby?
Yeah.
What? That happened?
It did.
I thought you were done.
I
had no idea. Oh my. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Did I hear well? Another baby. What number is this, Nate? 3?
Number 3, yes.
Congrats. Well, you know, the more the merrier.
There's a big spread. So yes, the older ones have been helpful.
I'm sure they're probably stoked. Oh, that's
amazing.
So precious. Oh,
very nice.
Amazing. So probably, Nate, when I emailed you, you're probably a baby had just been born.
July 1st.
Oh, okay, cool.
You're all right. I'm really bad with birthdays, and so that's
a great one.
The first, and I was like telling my daughter, I was like, if he goes into the next day, I'll never remember his birthday.
Hey, Natu.
How's everything out there?
Hi, Natu.
Things are good. I'm actually in Seattle right now. I'm visiting my parents, having a really beautiful time.
Are you out there for a while?
How is the weather?
Nice. Amazing.
So hot. Yeah, it's like
no, it was. Now it's normal.
Okay.
Now it's normal. Yeah.
Hi, Natu. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Okay, so I'm setting up. I'm just opening other files, so you see my eyes are on and off. So I'll mute myself 1 second. So our group, so we're waiting on, because we have our first student ready there. And so, you know, Nate and Natu and all the students were live already. If you have any issues with that, please let me know. But otherwise, so now the whole world knows that you have another baby, Nate. That's how it goes. Hi, Jeffrey. Nice to see you.
Hey, Florencia. Nice to see you as well. Hey, Nate. Hey, Mary. Everyone.
Hey, it's good to see you.
Likewise.
Okay, so I think that we only have one more guest, Sulaika Ayub. But I think that what we're going to do is that, let's see, some people are coming in. I think that what we're going to do is that we're going to get started so we can keep the time. So first I'm going to say thank you. Thank you everybody for joining us. Okay, I think she comes here. Yeah. Hi, Suleika.
Hello.
Nice to
Sorry for
meet
the
you.
tardy as well.
No problem. I was telling everybody that we're live on YouTube. So if anybody has any issues with that, please let me know. Yes, Mira, that would be great. Thank you. So, okay, so now I think we're all here. The students, I see them, everybody joining in, but we have our first student ready. So I think that we're ready to go. So thank you everybody for joining us to our midterm review of thesis. We're going to see, yeah, I don't know how many students, let me see the list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 students. So 4 students, I have 4 students, and then the rest are MIRA students. So this is our group combined. The first 4 students that are going to be are my students, and the rest are MIRA. I don't know how, I mean, I think that Chef, what's the deal here, and Natu, you guys, you know really well, you've been through this. What is thesis? What is, how the semester is arranged. And Nate, you've been in so many. So like, I haven't met you. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right.
Perfect.
I always convert everything to Spanish. So anything is read in Spanish. So we, summer thesis is a continuation of kind of what is called thesis prep, which starts in January, where students work under the guidance of a thesis advisor. It's a thesis prep advisor. In general, is different than the summer thesis, or sometimes it continues. So Mira taught thesis prep. I didn't teach thesis prep this year. And so what they do is that they do research, and then in June, they begin with their summer project. So they, what we're seeing, what we should be seeing now, and we already had an earlier review, which is called asset review. So what we do today is really look at their thesis formation as they're going to present it in September, which is their final review. So this is not a research stage, this is not like, maybe look at this case study, maybe, so just to see where the conversation goes. This is like their last stage before they start to develop their final production. We used to be live, as you know, Natu and Chef, that you had to start now construction of something. We're now on this kind of medium. We might be hybrid also. Today we were going to be in the pod, but there were some issues, so we couldn't be in the pod. So the idea is that maybe the students might go, might do a hybrid, might present in a hybrid mode, but still much of the work presented on this medium. Much of the help, I think, at this point for them is to see where are you going, how are you advancing towards final, is this your site, is your program? Remember, this is at SIAR, the graduate program. They might not even have a site. This doesn't necessarily mean that they have a project. It might be a single drawing. It might be a movie. So, you have to kind of, really look at that kind of big picture. So with that, we're going to begin. And I like for you guys, since we're in the Zoom medium, it'd be great if the guest could self-introduce yourself. So you tell who you are and where you're coming from. So I have Nate first in my grid. We go by the Zoom grid.
Hi, my name's Nate. I teach at the University of Pennsylvania, and I have a practice called Hume Architecture in Brooklyn.
Thank you, Nate. Natu, you're next in my grid.
Hi, I'm Natu. I teach at SciArc, and I have a practice as an artist.
Thank you, Natu. Jeff.
Hey, I'm Jeff. I'm a current MFA candidate at Columbia University, and I am part of the architecture faculty at University of Houston.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Yes.
Hi, I'm Zuleika. I am trying to finish my PhD at Princeton on Manhattan Project and nuclear weapons, and I teach like the New York circuit. I grab an adjunct position at any of the whatever smattering of schools that are up here, and I'll be at Cooper in the fall.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And again, Mira and myself are the two teachers here, advisors to the student, and our first student is Jeannie. Jeannie, go ahead. So I think, again, we have 20 minutes per student. Please, the students do less than 5 minutes presentation. Otherwise, your time for discussion gets shortened. So go ahead.
Hi everyone, I'm Jin Yu and I'm Mark Chu student. My topic of thesis is soft architecture. What is an architecture of softness? In reality, most buildings are hard. And what could happen if we replace traditional hard structure with soft ones? Imagine if the walls were very soft, the door was soft, and the window were very soft. Here are some artwork references about soft materials. It's like kind of clutter. In the first image, the tile can be the ambiguous windows of building, and the second one can be the architectural wall. In Harry Harrow's research on how a baby monkey finds comfort with his mother, an object with soft materials was found to give the monkey his needed comfort. Can architecture play a role in providing a psychological sense of comfort in the therapeutic space? In Naga's The Cuteness of Avant-Garde, the distortion of the soft material creates a cute aesthetic to induce comfort, since the soft material can be easier shaped by the effective demise. And I could like to show the programs and my physical model. Can you hear the sound?
Yes, yes.
With softness, we can combine and press different elements to create a new whole. Unlike the architectural scheme, the architectural detail of softness has its quantify and qualify, which can measure. Soft materials are too pliable, therefore they need to be contained, such as concrete framework need to keep together by casting into a mold. For the still life, I reference Morandi's painting. And for the project, the container is a scenario of vertical volumes. I arrange it flat but animated parallel to Morandi's still life. Softness is an emotive quality that describes the material. Here are some details of the softness. The first one is a large flat vise, which can be architectural wall. And the second one is a collider vise, which can be the structural column. And you can see the detail, the distortion detail. And the third one has two layers, filling the soft material in the outer layer, which is the method for my project object to create room space for softness. And this scissors prorate software programmatically. The program is a reconstruction of a children's institute where it's in Koreatown, Los Angeles. The building has a neoclassic style with a central courtyard. The openings of the courtyard will be reimagined in this courtyard. This courtyard refers to San Pietro, which has a tempietto within a narrow courtyard. And I put the soft still life objects in the courtyard like Morandi's paintings. As the former I mentioned, thus forming a vertical playground in the courtyard. In the elevation of the courtyard, you can see filling the soft material in the courtyard. The original building can make hard support for those soft material, and which can be the potential solution for the structural problem for the softness. And for the section, the relationship between the courtyard and the old building is reversed. The courtyard can be the central space for the children institution, while the older one will be the circulation space. And here is the courtyard view. We can see softness provides openness for the courtyard. And I could like to talk on the efforts I will spend in the future. The first one is connect my soft volume by learning from the children's playground facilities. Like the glass artwork may be used on tubes, slimes, and the climbs elements. Softness help us to see how the children world things can work in the architecture field. And the second one is I want to design a soft architecture not only for children but also for adults. In adults' worlds, almost buildings are rigid, but there are many soft play facilities for children, like inflate playground. So I want to introduce those soft material to adults' worlds. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie.
So,
I think I hear myself.
Could you help me to show the mirror ball?
I can show it if you want. I can share. You want me to share it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll share. I'm going to share our mirror board. Okay. I'll have the other one open as well. Sorry. Okay, so I'll keep the mirror board so or critics can tell me what you would like to see, or any comments can also be added to the mirror board. I'm going to share the link.
Ginny, thank you for your presentation. First thought I'm having about your project is the sort of decision to use vases, right, as a means of containing these sort of like blobby, soft materials that you're interested in developing, right? I feel like in the way you're working through sort of giving that soft material a shape, we kind of lose the soft like squishiness of it, right? In your final rendering, I think you've taken these sort of really fun materials like slime and things that kind of splay out and spill and like flop, and given them these really like rigid forms that you've then sort of placed inside of the courtyard. I understand you're interested in the sort of idea of a playground, and playgrounds typically have like, you know, more like rigid materials or sort of even rigid aesthetic. And so I'm wondering how you might work through maybe letting these materials actually like take forms that are more natural to them rather than sort of like giving them these sort of undulating vase-like shapes to like help your argument.
Florencia, could you go to the angle zone? The up, yeah, the angle zone. For this one, is I try to use digital way to make more natural shape for the soft material, and I was still testing and maybe have some technique problem. So for the courtyard render, I just use a texture from my physical model, so there has some problem. The edge is not very soft, but I think I will solve it in the future time.
No, I understand. I mean, I understand that there might be sort of technical, like different ways of sort of working on this, but I'm thinking more of the sort of form of the materials themselves, right? Like slime, for example, whatever container you put it in, it'll take that shape. I'm wondering if you can maybe design a shape that has some kind of more like that has a more like soft quality to it, right? I think something that extends just beyond sort of like curved forms.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Go ahead.
the video I really like because it becomes really about the action, and even that it was important for you to have the sound, like the squeezing and the squishing. It's about like physically in term, because soft could be visual, could be tactile. There's a lot of ways you could start to like parse that out, but in the video it feels like this very physical thing about these things being like squeezed, doubled up, and I think it is the clearest for me in there's a kind of like lighter yellow piece in the vase and then the pink face, because I think in those cases, unlike the slime, which ends up feeling more poured or cast, which I think is some of the like questions about the container, those still look soft in terms like you can tell there was some form even without the like eyes and nose, but this thing that's like folded and pliable, whereas like some of the other materials, I don't know, they almost become hard now that they're in there. They almost are more like resin or something like scaled up, so I wonder if one way, and I think this would, dovetail into some of the earlier comments, like could the yellow or pinks, could some of these break back out of the mold? Like after you took the mold away, would they start to like decompress a little bit, or would they peel off? Like what would be the other layers besides the casting you would like add on or let something open up, which seems spatially like that could start to give you ways to come in and out of this, because I think for me, the other question with that is the section. Like right now, we see the like inflatable slide you had, and you see all these great studies where these things are physically squished and squeezed and compressed into each other. But then the section, we get like a typical wall thickness and it's hollowed out, and I know this is probably early stage of that drawing, but it just seems like this is where it would be a really novel project. That what is the kind of soft, like what is the tectonic of this? What is the space of this? I think it wouldn't look like anything that we typically see. Like it wouldn't look like the classical building section next to it.
For the container and the support problem, I was thinking because I use a lot of different material, so it has potential to each material can support each other, and maybe some part will be hard to support. Like some part will be glass, some part may be concrete, and also the courtyard can support the soft material. Like some, I don't have, like maybe I see some concrete project use the fabric to support the concrete. So maybe like fabric clothes can support the slime, and maybe polygon, and the slime is pliable, so it also can connect different fabric and toys. So I think it has many potential to solve this problem.
Nate, this is an example, I think, of how the section should look like, no? But with like some fabrics and the car. This is what Jeannie is saying.
Yeah, and if you start to draw an architectural drawing of that, yeah, you wouldn't get like generic floors anymore, or thin shell. You'd start to find all kinds of. There's also difference, which is the other thing. I think what you're just saying in terms of the materiality, that these wouldn't all be made out of one material. Like you could almost start to code each one of these colors as like a different material, which means it has a different thickness, which means it has like a different give, or maybe even like starts to get programmed differently.
I think the comments so far were really insightful. I think what I could add to that is maybe that the kind of duality that you held from the beginning of the project, where you had a kind of range of different tactile versions of softness, whatever the kind of gradient is of hardness to softness that was contained in that. And then you had this idea of these fixed forms. And now I think you have the ability to maybe like make a little bit more complex of a taxonomy of what's considered to be container and what's considered to be soft object. And they might actually be blurring a lot more. And I think the use of the tempietto actually might be really insightful, because here you have a condition where it's not just a kind of solid, what is it, like solid void relationship, but there's a whole series of kind of gradients of perforation that are created by, like, I don't know, the different forms of colonnades, the different sizes of columns and their heights, and the kind of transitions you have between what is totally interior and totally exterior. So even kind of looking at a section of that and relating that to a section of your much more kind of rigidly fixed forms might provide insight in how you can kind of blur some of those and allow either perforations within your vases, for instance. And I think maybe also that it would be crucial to get very careful about scale in that process now, because not only are you dealing with, I guess, like human bodies occupying these solid voided spaces, but children specifically. And so getting maybe also a variety of scalar considerations as you begin to define different interstitial spaces would be probably very helpful.
Just like to add something quick before we move on. There's something really remarkable about the video. There's something really remarkable about the act of kind of forcing and stuffing the vessels with a series of toys, like the plush animals. It really, I think, is kind of akin to Jenny Saville's paintings, in which she takes her body, her overweight body and her fat, and kind of presses herself up against glass, and in forcing herself into that kind of conformity of like a clearly distinguishable shape, but because it's glass, you kind of see all of the artifacts and all of the distortion that's happening, right, that you're getting to with some of the faces. And that is a way to kind of counter the idea of conformity, right? So again, I really think the thesis for me is about conformity and about subjection, and taking this stuffed figure and forcing it into the vessel, that act, and then looking at what occurs is a way to kind of counter conformity, right? So you're looking at what's occurring on the outside, right, through the kind of vessel as a kind of means to, I don't know, perhaps look at architectural history and the vessels themselves as being a kind of colonnade, and then using that act of stuffing as a means to kind of diverge or argue against this idea of kind of conformity, which I think is a really remarkable thesis. And like the comments already said, I think where it becomes really fascinating is when you get to the interior sections, right? You wouldn't just have an offset. You'd have something that's vastly different than that kind of exterior, very clearly defined vessel.
Yeah, I think so.
I really like that comment. I like all the comments, and I would add that I think that the dichotomy, and I think this has been said in part, the dichotomy between the components which are with effort get stuffed into something else. There is a sort of relationship between the thing that holds it, or the thing that is doing the work to stuff it, and then the stuff itself. So in that way, you already have a thesis that has a set of players, right? There's an idea about work to hold something in, or hold something, like what would that mean to scale into the scale of architecture? And I would echo the comment about scale. Like, how do you now scale this idea rather than taking it at scale as a still life, and to bring it directly into architecture, in which case it becomes in some ways calcified in these images. But nonetheless, the ideas are still really interesting. But how do you scale that? How do you scale the idea of pressure? How do you scale the idea of something visually soft that's being pushed up against something? How do you scale the idea of the thing that is containing, and then the material itself, which is the kind of tactile, like soft stuff? So how do you make that leap in scaling seems to me really, to me, and you could imagine it really in two different ways. One is I think your physical models are amazing. I can imagine you spending some time potentially working on a fragmented model of your now new vessel, which is the existing building, and thinking about how you could start to stuff and lay material into it, and what kinds of things would have to tie it back or to hold it in place. How do you treat the ground to receive it, etc. I think that seems very exciting, and a way in. Another way in my mind, and maybe picking up on what Jeff was suggesting, was that maybe it's not about distributing this and the building as a container, like as a whole, but really thinking about the interior of that courtyard as the vessel, and thinking about a sort of pressed condition like you have in these images, but really developing what the interior of that thing is. I think that so it's kind of more of a distributed idea first, like how do you think about the whole building as a sort of vessel to hold it, versus how do you think about bringing in an architectural object that in itself already has a container, and that you're developing really the interior world of that thing, and thinking about how do you make a window and all of that. And I think those are maybe slightly different ways to think about how to deploy this at the scale of the building, and both really, really interesting. And I think probably both would really be served by continuing to work physically, but also thinking about how do you start to work on a way of drawing it that will get you into the project that's outside of the sort of one-to-one assumptions around the digital model. I think the digital model, assuming this idea of a one-to-oneness, I think it always tends to fall short. I think you could probably work on, look at any of the drawings that Nate in his office does for sure. I mean, looking at how do you draw that in section would be probably also relieve you a little bit, so you can do the physical work and also think about how to draw it in 2 dimensions.
Thank you.
I mean, at a really kind of not dumbed down, but simple level, it could be continuing the physical model work within, like creating the building as vessels as well. And if you start dealing with perforations, like continuing to work just by hand and like carefully cutting the model and scanning it as the sections, for instance, rather than trying to recreate something digital that doesn't have that kind of like labor, material, energetics, I think that was being referenced just now, which was an awesome comment, by the way.
Yeah, I will
Yeah.
try.
I think all these are amazing comments. I tried to write as much as I could in post-its, Jeannie. Let's see, we have this recorded so you can look at it back. But ending with how do you transfer the digital, the analog to the digital? I think that's a big question, and we discussed that. That's why I asked Jeannie to just image map the final for midterm review. Because that's okay. It's a shortcut that we can take a midterm review, not a shortcut we can take a final. So I think that I think that your comments to of maybe doing a model that you just cut and then retrace, rather than finding a digital parallel universe to that. Like these models cannot be cut because they're done. This is why I really like this example that Jeannie had at the beginning of Jacques Henry. Maybe she needs to do something like that and then bring it back. So I think that's a question of how to move on to final thesis. But I think all the comments were wonderful. So thank you so much for everything. Thank you, Jeannie. Amazing work, of course.
Thank you, everyone.
So there you can see. I don't know what I wrote in the small notebook. No, post-it. So where are you, Sunny? Sunny. Oh, Sunny, I couldn't see you. You were right in front of me.
Hello.
Hi, Sunny. So Sunny's next. Sunny, go ahead and share. Thank you. As I said, Sunny, we have 20 minutes. So if you can present in less, and Mira is keeping time and she's putting notes, keep it less than 5 to begin. And then, so you can have at least 15 minutes of conversation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sunny. It is now 2:32 in Las Vegas, and today I wish to present to you the proposed project of architecture located at the United Nations in Geneva, where the Human Rights Council is located, advocating the freedom of speech and the freedom of press. This thesis stands in opposition to censored, sanitized, and biased news. It has a mission of publishing and archiving news accurately from all points of view. It draws parallel between the nonlinear temporal qualities of contemporary architecture with spaces of archiving and publishing, in the sense that both of them are not only a matter of making history, but are also projections into the future. Architecture aims to provide a safe platform for qualified individual journalists and press from around the world to publish and archive their investigation and their versions of truth. Each news has its own temporality, given the place, the time, the sequence of events, the platform of issuing news, the nature of news, and the archive of news depict different scales of temporality. Architecture, archive, and news are not only a matter of making history, but are also projections into the future. So the history of the original design of the League of Nations, which is the now current United Nations in Geneva, also raised question of choosing between the traditional architectural representation of power in the past and modern architecture. The selection of this site of architecture attempts to respond to Le Corbusier's criticism that the built design of the first neoclassical building was a copy of his original competition entry by mirroring like this. So this is Le Corbusier's proposal, and this design, which was designed after his proposal, is a mirror of this shape. To respond to the controversial history of the existing building, the new addition is the flip side of the existing building, where the current Human Rights Council is located vertically and horizontally. So the new site will be here, which is a flip of the existing part of the building, both horizontally like this and vertically like this. So it will be a sunken building. The history, the approach of the objective of the thesis, to approach the objective of the thesis, different spatial arrangements are explored to understand how the synchronization of visions and changing motions throughout that journey at the sites can raise one's awareness of reality. From here, you can see that different materials at different walls collapse together in one single surface when one is able to see through to the end, collapsing different time frames in one single moment. While archiving has been perceived as something hidden in the past, it is now given a temporal meaning, a new temporal meaning in this project. Archive is thesis making, marking, and movement transmutation of one thing into another. It has a narrative notion that connects the past, the present, and the future. Siegfried Giedion took the Bauhaus campus to explain that time, duration, succession, and continuity are the constituent factors of architecture. So this project studies the visitor's changing vision with his changing motions, raise one's awareness of space-time. Unlike the single perspective enforced in ancient Western architecture, Giedion proposed that the multiplication of viewpoints is what contemporary architecture is about. I found that the floor plan of the Bauhaus building are reminiscent of the essence depicted in Asian scroll painting, which allows one to see multiple views at a time on a 2D dimensional drawing. Perception of a building is dependent on the observer's displacement, like how news has to be absorbed and reported from multiple perspectives in order to grasp the truth of the sequential events. Different spatial arrangement affects one's sense of temporality given the viewer's displacements and changing visions. In an open space plan, one can see everything at a time, but it fails to create the the sense of temporality to trigger one's awareness of physical space-time. In a space arranged in an enfilade, plans let one feel the progression in the space along with the movements, but the vision is forced to be a single perspective. The image in the middle depicts how one can see through to the end of the pathway along, but not all the time, with its motion while allowing the shift of multiple viewpoints along the journey like this. So the study also begins with a simple box. When it is viewed from different angles, it is perceived differently by variation of the observer's location. How and in which direction are they then projected into a flat screen reproduce different forms and shapes. These images perceived by the observer in fact have a three-dimensional form like this. So these are the geometrical forms formed by different projections from different angles of viewing one simple geometries. The landscape, this landscape tries to depict how time can be seen at one point, at one location. It's just like viewing the scroll painting, that seeing different events happening at the same time. So inside of the architecture institution, the journey inside comprises intersecting temporal axes. Various pathways are created in a zigzag shape to enhance the sense of temporality, while a clear vision to the end can be seen at some specific position like this. The architectural form does not directly define the circulations. Visitors have the options to read the space in a different way and to understand the overall situation of an issue comprehensively. Time becomes part of the spatial experience as our eyes have to move from scene to scene in various adjacent spaces. This design connects back to the idea of capturing from multiple perspectives on news report. Throughout the journey, the observer is no longer just a third person, but is part of the architecture. This relates to the call for active engagement of archiving news from everyone in different positions. That's it for my presentation today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sunny. I'm going to share the mural board if you wanna, yeah.
Sunny, were you, I don't think I heard it. I'm assuming that you studied the transparency essay by Rowan Sletsky for this project quite closely. Am I correct?
Sorry, could you repeat the transparency of?
The transparency essay, Literal and Phenomenal by Colin Rowe and Robert Sletsky.
It was, no, I actually didn't refer to that.
Wow, it's great because, you know, they talk about the UN building and the phenomenal transparency through the walls and the use of some of the perspectile methods you were studying.
Yeah, I actually based on Gideon's space-time architecture.
I see, also, okay.
And then I connect the philosophy with some of the Asian scroll painting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when David Hockney, he talks about how the manipulation of how the space is depicted and presented to the viewers. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to see different viewpoints at the same time.
They quote Gideon also in there because they look at his Bauhaus analysis similar to the way you did, which is just really surprising that you came about it from a different way. I would say that I think it sounds like it's been a lot of work and it's a kind of a massive undertaking that you're doing. Formally, I think what I could offer is maybe looking at just the end of that essay where they consider the transparency in Corb's original proposal. Because I think your use of these isometric projections is very useful, but the forms are still reading like bounded objects with whatever X amount of walls where every wall is kind of given a slightly different treatment. and the adjacencies of each kind of semi-contained space in relation to other semi-contained spaces seems maybe a little underdeveloped, and that might make sense for where you are in the project. But I would take maybe this drawing very seriously and also begin to, like, I'd begin to look at the formal relationships between all of the adjacencies, and also get very like, maybe very like rigid and precise with the perspectile kind of like walkthroughs of each one of these, because I think to capture the condition that you showed in one board where you were showing kind of 4 different photographs of like, which is really 4 different event hoods of what is a single moment supposedly in time and space, but you're kind of questioning that or kind of expressing that differently. In order to get to this level, to have the architecture kind of get to this level of signification, I think that that's what that would require. I think that's the only kind of direct advice I can think of right now, but also to say that I think it's a really interesting and intriguing thesis. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I really like this idea of inverting or challenging the archive. You know, we I think take the archive as we tend to take the archive as like a very objective, factual record, where in fact it's based off of you know, particular histories and accounts from people within a certain social class and economic stance. And so the challenge of the archive is I think going through and pulling out, you know, what's between the lines and getting personal accounts of like what's actually ongoing within a particular period, right? So the formal structure of the project, I think, is really phenomenal. I think it really reflects a very kind of anti-Westernized idea of perspective, right? Which is what you're kind of referencing back with Hockney and referencing back with idea of Chinese scroll paintings and the idea of like kind of anti-perspective. For me, where it gets very, very, very fascinating is within that drawing itself. The detail within each one of those spaces, I think, becomes even more pronounced or expressed. So I don't know if you begin just adding to that drawing or filling it or getting more flavor of like what is occurring within that space. What is it that you're counting? What is the difference between the archive that you're presenting versus our kind of understanding of the archive now, right? As it means to kind of, as a kind of anti-archive.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to explore the space inside and how like the space arrangement can affect the temporality. For example, if it's like a news which span longer, or maybe I don't know, like how the arrangement of the circulation. I think basically is what I'm interested in order to represent different types of news. Like it can be breaking news, it can be planned news, which they have very different temporal elements and qualities.
Maybe one question I have looking at the, you know, with you bring, you know, speaking about circulation, looking at the large drawing that you ended with, yeah, I really liked in the kind of GIFs or the animated images where you're talking about that these, you know, materials would collapse and space would collapse, and the other parts it kind of opens up where you see, you know, multiple materials. I'm wondering though, when I see the overall, there's a kind of evenness to it in terms of the materials and also even the kind of like scatter or the jitter of the spaces and the circulation. And I'm curious, like if there would be places where like things would align, or even in certain views, like in those GIFs, like things would align so then you would understand when it collapses or when it like realigns, you know, or if it's meant to kind of have this evenness throughout it. And the one reason, like this might not be a helpful reference, but I think of Al Jaffe's fold-in drawings from Mad Magazine in the 70s, where the drawing would be one thing, but if you'd open the flap, then it would stretch the drawing and something else would happen. And just looking at your circulation, that large drawing, like it almost implies like the drawing is kind of being folded up, or it could kind of like literally physically kind of unfold. So I don't know, that was one thing I really liked, those animations the way we're talking about, but I'm just wondering, like, are there these moments when everything kind of snaps and then you understand that it's slipping? Like, how do I know if it's collapsing, if it's all kind of equally collapsed, or if it's already collapsed? I guess was my kind of question.
I don't know. I thought of the different materials and patterns. They when in reality, for a journey for a live archive, it can be a journey for certain specific topic, which different sections, different petitions is represented by different stands or different media. And then when you look from one point, you can see different media presenting their idea at the same time. But then you have to walk through all the doors in order to see what they're saying. I don't know, that's a very preliminary thought.
Well, I agree with the sort of comments that were made earlier, and Sunny, just going off of what you mentioned, this idea of sort of maybe thinking about the thresholds of the moment to highlight, right, that collapse or that extension, right? This sort of like thinking about the circulation path as like a series of, I guess, like portals to different types of information or different types of content could be interesting. I think for me, the videos of the spaces I think are the most compelling for sure. And I wonder if there's a way that you can sort of even extend them to sort of really push this idea of having to like sort of make your way through the maze that is the archive.
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing the article so you see the Suleika put, Sunny, so you see that. I mean, you can then read, this is just an image from there, but I think that, definitely something you have to see, Sunny. Just to put up there the parallel.
Is there, Sunny, is there information about, I am curious about the status of like what material content is archived there? Is there are you making, are you interested in establishing a sense of specificity? When I look at your plan, I also am thinking a little bit about like OMA's plan for the LACMA. I don't know if you guys the OMA, is it LACMA? Is it LACMA? I think it is LACMA, where it's like a tray and they have these kind of cross-cutting sort of moments of trying to create these new kind of lateral connections. And I'm curious about what sorts of interruptions in content do you imagine existing? Would there be, do you imagine in the remaining weeks of your project wanting to become more specific about scenarios of what is archived here? Or is it about really working on the kind of right? I would imagine, because I think that could help you take us at the human view, like reorient us back down. I really love the fact that you have the axons, but then you also have the kind of animated perspectives where you are kind of at kind of moving at a person's scale through the project. It becomes very much about the interior elevation unfolding. I think those spaces of your project are really successful. I do wonder whether or not there is almost a form of a way for you to help structure us to see, maybe one way of moving, like maybe there's I need about a format like a diptych or something, where on one side we're seeing a kind of movement in one direction, another is like the cross-cut direction. So we begin to understand the space unfolding in very different kinds of, based on a different perspectives. So like in the case where you had the diptych or the quad image of the Trump scene. The question is, would you be thinking about how to, because in what you have there with the green and then the beige interiors, they're always kind of like one way of seeing, another way of seeing, but they're not really quite kind of, we don't quite understand how they knit together, or how one person's movement and one person's, like, let's say, journey through the archive could be quite different depending on one's orientation. And I'm just thinking that maybe an understanding of, maybe you don't need a narrative of what happens, what is archived there, but rather an idea about a story of how different people, how different bodies in space could be moving based on kind of a different journey through the space. I think that would be, so it isn't about everything becoming quite cohesive, but actually, and I think this is what Nate was suggesting, things become a bit more in tension with one another. I think that could be a maybe a nice way to think about how to evolve these the initial elevational animations, which I think are really, really successful. And then I would also wonder just about the way in which you use the scale of texture, right? You have this idea that texture in a way, texture and color in a way become a way of marking distance and cohesiveness between zones. And I'm wondering about how that could be something, a space for design, not necessarily making the things really far away, really big, but maybe thinking about how scale can actually help stretch or compress an idea about the body's movement through space, if you're kind of anticipating the kind of connection of one zone to the next. So it seems like there is something really productively, like the space of how you think about texture and color in these elevations seems like they would be very operative for you, and maybe a space for it to continue to tune as you think about how, you know, bodies in space are kind of like experiencing different journeys through the space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Mira. I'll think about that.
If I can just, I know we're a little over time, but if I could piggyback off that last comment, and just when we were zoomed into the kind of ISO view, there seems to be maybe a visual language already emerging, not just of like things that are like seeable or transparent or whatever, but this idea of the kind of compression expansion, and then these little moments of kind of slippage or intersection that might determine certain thresholds seems to already be percolating a little bit there. So just to add on to what I think what Mira was saying and what I was observing in the drawing.
Thank you, everybody. I think that I heard the alarm ringing. Tanya, I put some of the example. I think that Mira's point on this project, which is the LACMA proposal, which is the fact is, and you should look at it in detail, but the fact that it's a single space under a single roof might make sense. And also about the archive, you know, he's looking at a, you know, a encyclopedic way, kind of non-Western way of looking at the archive. LACMA has a, you know, huge archive of culture. But I think you should see the process. We'll talk about that. But just to Suleika's point on this drawing, that maybe this is not all separate spaces, it's one single room that you somehow transverse. So anyway, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. Great presentation. The website is great. Maybe you can share it and put it in the. I don't know. It's Lauren. I think Mitsuki is next. No. Yeah, Mitsuki.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Hi, Mitsuki.
I will share my screen. Synthetic imitation. Building as a resource. I put the bricks, wood, and stones next to the building, but I'm not interested in what those buildings are made of. The idea of my pieces is buildings are also the raw material. So we always take materials from nature, but if that direction from nature to the city flipped, the city can be a repository of the raw material. So I will peel the skin of the city, which is the facade of the building, to create something like bricks or wood. So this is the process of making materials from the facade. I distorted the image of the building and created the object. This is also the process of abstraction, so similar to making wood from trees. But these objects will be assembled to create a new building. And this is the physical model I wanted to present today, but the project site is in Louisiana. Louisiana has a problem that losing the land rapidly. And one of the biggest reasons is that people made too many canals and let seawater into the marsh and destroy the vegetation. You can see many straight lines in the middle of the marsh. So if you see the map in 2021, you can see the marsh, for example, in this area, disappearing. So the idea of this project is a kind of machine island to remove the salt from water working in the marsh. In this project, I assemble the pieces created from the city, put the object to the nature, rather than taking natural materials from nature and build them in the city. But if you think about only the function, these ornamental objects are not necessary, but machines or huge structures are not beautiful, especially in nature. So I reversed the flow of the material and built the artificial aesthetics in nature. So in this island, water will go inside from here and heated inside this tank, and fresh water will collect it to this tank and be released to the marsh. And this island can be moved to the other place and help the restore marsh. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitsuki. I'm going to share. So what Mitsuki is talking about, her physical models, we were going to be live today. And so she was going to present to you these models that are, the earlier studies of her island, her materials, her architectural materials. So just wanted to zoom them in and show them, within this.
Maybe one question to get started. I think the models are really beautiful. My initial question is how literal they are in terms of the material, and meaning like if you're actually kind of repurposing and deforming the material, like would all of it act uniformly? So if there's a mix here of metal, it looks like wood, there's probably a couple types of metal, like would they all so cleanly bend? Or even if you are doing this synthetically to like represent that, I'm wondering if you would get some difference, so that the fine grill work might deform slightly differently than the masonry or some of the like larger elements. And so, would it all stay so kind of pristine, or would some of that material difference break that? Or are you kind of just interested in the kind of visual aspects of those facades? So I guess that's where I'm trying to sort out like the literalness of repurposing the material versus like the sign of what these kind of facades represent or just kind of look like. Because I think these could start to get more interesting the more you kind of put some of that kind of materiality onto it. Like where would things start to splinter or slip off of each other, or where it wouldn't be just so maybe clean or sort of digital when we are talking about like those photos of potentially like 100-year-old materials in Louisiana.
I would add, yeah, go ahead.
You see
this is a good question to see how she's going to move on to final pieces. Mitsuki,
yeah.
This is a,
Like, are you taking 20-foot chunks of this and actually deforming these, or are things being cast to look like that? I would just be curious though, like, because I think not just like in terms of like trying to be practical, like which way are you doing it or what's it made of, but I just think that would give you like a whole other set of qualities in terms of how this thing goes together and what it looks like, that I think would just make it more interesting.
I totally agree. And I think that that the narrative for you, the idea of reversing the direction of like of product production, you know, producing materials for building. I think that's really, that is what your thesis is. That is what you need to be investigating. And I wonder whether or not, to Nate's point, I was thinking a little bit maybe alongside that same wavelength, which was, what are some ways in which, like, you know, these, let's say, wood and rocks and bricks or whatever, how are they fabricated? Like, there's, you know, there's different ways in which wood is, you know, cut and splayed and brought back together. There's different ways in which materials are, let's say, crushed down and then repurposed, and like, or like, you know, brick, you know, it's soft and then it becomes hard. Like, are there not concrete, not, you don't have to be comprehensive, but what are some methods of material construction that you can kind of be referencing and then maybe reimagining? So in this case, maybe you're thinking about, yeah, how to skin something versus compress it and roll it back to one another, like different like product construction techniques that maybe come out of like the raw material to let's say lumber, or how rock is cut. Those techniques seem like they could be recipes for you to be kind of inverting and rethinking. To me, that would be a really like a way in, where it is starting to still have a dialogue with this idea of material production without and then you can still be, it seems like you're interested in certain digital like constructions, but I think that you can be doing both simultaneously. You kind of know where you want to get, I think, a bit, but I think that engaging that the kind of process itself seems like it'd be really robust. And that's what I like about that second slide. The second slide, which is that you're actually starting to get it at the third slide. Both slides really get at like, what does it mean to turn something into a material? And I would say, how do you think about that in a much more like methodical way, and referencing more traditional ways in which materials are constructed as a way for you to kind of reimagine?
There's so for me, there's a bit of a schism also, where we go from, on one hand, this like almost like a visual topological kind of like morphing thing happening, which is super cool. And then we have suddenly these kind of like very traditional top-down images of topography of a certain landscape, where suddenly the first half of the project just becomes kind of like objects. Suddenly they just transform into objects rather than these like active like morphologies. And so I guess I'm concerned with how to kind of fill that gap or connect them a little bit more at this stage of the project. And perhaps some of the earlier comments that we're talking about, the kind of implied materials that are in there, they could fuse through. Like, some of those materials are much better at tension in the way of a kind of stretching. Some of them are very brittle and they're not good for that. And so they would break, whereas some of them would stretch and then maybe like break off around the edges or whatever, meaning that some of the morphologies that you're doing are not necessarily immaterial either. Like, if you begin to think about the different types of iron or plaster or glass, they would react. If you were to stretch them in this way, certain things would happen that are relatively easy to kind of calculate or predict. I mean, it's not like, you don't have to be, I don't think, completely accurate where like all your like, structures, formulas all like work out, but some of them are going to disintegrate, some of them are going to stay up, and then these objects aren't going to be kind of frozen in time as these kind of like purely filled things. Like, this thing that we're looking at is going to have a lot more kind of material resolution in it, whether it's in breakage or in sustaining itself or whatever. And then that begins to maybe have a way to engage or situate itself with the natural landscape or whatever that's around it as well. And then you have a real kind of like back and forth between what's happening. I mean, I don't know what the final goals of thesis are, what fulfills whatever it needs to be, but I think that already is a really interesting provocation when you kind of crash these two worlds together in that way.
Yeah, I agree with the sort of previous comments, especially about sort of bringing back in the materiality of these original buildings. I think the work of artist Alex Chinek might be useful. I can send an image in the chat, but just sort of thinking about what it means to like peel the facade off of a building and sort of take materials that do have a sort of like rigidity and a sort of understood like limit, right, as to their sort of flexibility or their sort of ability to be malleable. I think maybe looking at his process and sort of how some of those more like rigid materials are rendered to seem more like flexible and fluid. Yeah, I think visually the sort of models that you have are beautiful. I think it's unfortunate we couldn't see them in person, but yeah, I think definitely sort of bringing back in the sort of material properties of all the buildings you're looking at is going to be really important here.
Just to, yeah, maybe to elaborate on a couple of points that were made at the beginning and actually now. So building usually concerned with, you know, forming and shaping. Here, there's a concern with kind of unbuilding, undoing, which for me is a very clear extension of like Gordon Matta Clark's theory on architecture, right? And which is that kind of punning, right, of anarchy and architecture. And I see this as a kind of direct transcendent of that, and especially in the third slide with the knife. I mean, there's none more a kind of relevant reference to the other than Matta Clark's project titled Splitting. Where this differs and where I find it kind of really fascinating is, again, kind of picking back up on Nate and Mira's points on bringing some of the material processes back in. So the operation differs from Matta Clark, and instead of it just kind of being like a cut and split open and like a house falling back on itself, the house here goes through a series of transformative processes that are reflective of, you know, certain material or certain methods of making material, right? Rolling, stamping, and that for me is where this operation, which right now is kind of monocular, and it's generated through a series of kind of like perspectival distortions, changes from the kind of view of the human or the person to the view of the material itself, right? And so I see it as I see the project of the kind of final thesis as being something discussed in series, and discussed based off of a specific material method, right? Or a means of making that material. And so that's where I see some of the distortions right now as being, you know, inherently kind of perspectival, right? You're getting this kind of like fisheye, rounded, elongated, or exaggerated distortion, turning from that into something that is more kind of reflective, like, you know, yeah, like process based off of the material itself. So the idea of undoing then really picks up on the, you know, initial means of like turning raw material into building and then turning building into raw material, right? And kind of inverting that process. And that would be applied into that operation. And that would be shown through a succession or a series of models, which you're already doing. It'd be really fascinating.
But I wonder, to that point, you know, to the earlier comments, either through Natu's example or Mira's quest, I mean, this is my question as well. Mizuki's. As we move on, you know, I wonder whether we stay in abstraction and materiality starts to happen as a new materiality, not trying to melt, you know, torque, a la, you know, Matta Clark, where it's like the actual abandoned building that gets cut, but actually is a kind of a repurposing of the geometries of an existing building to new forms. And then there's a kind of a new materiality that happens. So this is not, building is not a ready-made that is transformed into a new machine, but actually the machine is done with the kind of forms of the existing building. I think that's I don't know, Mizuki, maybe you have an answer to that or to what you want to do. But I think this is a fundamental shift or moment in the thesis where she has to take a decision of how she moves to September.
Well, I wonder to that point whether or not Mitsuki, you are more specific about the role of the ironwork in New Orleans. Like, is that what we're doing? Is that you're looking at, because Florencia, the way that your thought makes me think that there is something inherent in the actual sort of tradition of that ironwork. It's the way that it rolls around buildings, around corners of buildings, the way that it's the laciness of it, the kind of intricacy of it, that itself becomes, it's not every material. It's not everything there. It's one thing, like one type of thing that is in excess and has a sort of tradition and history, and that you can be thinking about that and its legacy, and kind of repurposing and reimagining both geometrically and also materially. And then also you can get into chromatics, because I think there's a lot happening right now in your project when you are taking all of these things and then you put it on a pink background and you spray it all pink. Again, there is something about the kind of abstraction that comes out of the kind of the last layer, which is the paint layer, let's say. So maybe it's just also just being much more earnestly specific about the legacy of ironwork and the grills in New Orleans, which have a really interesting history.
But I wonder, I think that's an amazing point, because it doesn't mean that she has to do an ironwork in 2021 ironwork building that can rust in the ocean. How you do ironwork today. So it might be ironwork history. You establish yourself within that history, and then you present it as today. I mean, this model, which is a 3D print, the ironwork, it's not the same as the original. I mean, it's already strange or stranged. I think that because it's not like everything, a window, the door, everything. It's like there's elements that build up this new machine.
That's totally doable, right? Like if you're thinking about like if that second or fourth image was kind of like the kit of parts that started the exploration, having gone through it full circle, there's actually a much more expanded kit of parts already, whether it's like pink as a spray paint color or something, or the fact that like if this ironwork has kind of this very rich historical material situatedness, that like how do you translate that into a kit as you like to see it? Whether I'm not talking about like the traditional kit of parts, like where everything's like a little piece of a log and screws or whatever, but actual, whether they're forms or colors or affects, there seems to be one here that can reconstitute these objects again running through full circle. It doesn't seem like such a stretch, pun intended, to wrap it back in. I still don't understand the kind of landscape intervention part of it. I don't know if that's necessary or if like you have to do it because the world's coming to an end, or it's such a charged region. I don't know how to address that, but it seems like the rest of that would really account for a rigorous thesis exploration.
I completely understand the question. I guess that the way that Mitsuki sees that is that this land, I mean, you can treat this test you treat it in land that is like, land, or in the ocean, which is like no land. And I think the marsh is in between, it's neither or. And so she can have an architecture that is neither or, it's nor machine nor building. So I think I found interesting that she had an island in the middle of the ocean. I was like, the marsh is a nice in between, where you're treating the land as unstable. With an architecture that is very unstable, because these materials are not going to give you enclosure, they're not going to give you tectonics. I think the way that Mitsuki sees it is that this is an architecture that is incomplete, and the marsh is like a land that it's incomplete as well. Okay, so thank you, everybody. Mitsuki, I think that maybe we have a path focus. This is the thing, is that midterm review sometimes opens too many paths. You're like, which one do I take? I mean, maybe all of them come to the same end, so it doesn't matter, because I think that you have a thesis, and that's all that that is important at this point. So thank you, Mitsuki. Thank you, everybody. And Lauren, you're next.
Hi, let me share my screen. So my thesis is called Solar System. The art of weaving has always been considered kind of an appropriate discipline for women, and it's a practice that has spanned history through countless cultures, from the simple loom to the more technologically advanced practices used today. It's part of our culture, and as time progresses, there are always new ways to not only create textiles, but to redefine them as well. My thesis attempts to take weaving, which is a practice so old it's ingrained in our culture as a female gendered discipline, and mix it with new technology, which are solar embedded yarns, to create a new type of energy generating facade and redefine textiles. While seen as a domestic practice, there are very strong women that change the face of weaving. For example, this is the work of Annie Albers, who deconstructed the gender politics of the weaving industry. Helen Jongarius, who pushes boundaries with all of her work. According to her, textile is the lightest and strongest construct you can have. So with this, we could replace concrete and cement in the building industry. She argues that 3D weaving in particular could be used to interlace building materials with photovoltaic yarns and create architecture, such as these smaller models. And facades or solar panels can be created using this technique. I also looked to Barbara Kruger, who brings in social issues as an artist, including those of gender and the politics of the body. And since weaving is seen as an issue of gender with rope, I felt her color palette was apt to use, especially since my site is the Geffen Contemporary at MoCA, but more specifically the Frank Gehry canopy structure. So this is just, I'm gonna go quickly through how I came up to my project. So I did color, I went to the site and chose my color palette based on what I saw there, Barbara Kruger's work, came up with a pattern and used the color palette in different ways to make the pattern not seem so obvious. I used that and created it with paper to make a physical analog model, and then built a little miniature of that canopy to put that on top. So moving ahead from the asset review, I started working with yarn. I wanted to kind of continue making with my hands and actually sew my project for this first part. So I'm going to show a quick video just of that process. these are my looms. My goal is to have the yarn kind of stands in for these solar yarns, and by interweaving conductive yarn and laminated strips of photovoltaic cells, a new type of facade can replace solar panels that are now on roofs or in fields, which generate energy during the day that can be used to power the building at night. So I wanted to see the difference between them taut, loose, and then kind of folded in on themselves to create different 3D structures versus the more 2D that I got with paper. And then I put all three together and kind of combined them in a few different ways just to see what color, what texture, what shapes I could get. And then I kind of put them on this digital model just to see how maybe, you know, a more three-dimensional, organically shaped canopy would look versus just the flat straight across canopy on the structure. And then if you were to drape the looser yarn, maybe stretching from the canopy across the sides of the building versus this kind of mock-up where you'd have them straight taut across the side of the building with the organic shape on the on top of the structure. So now that I've done kind of the analog, the making with my hands, and kind of seeing in person what kind of shapes and what the tautness, what these different yarns can do, I'm planning on moving forward in the digital and going on from there.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
I'm going to share our Miro board. I wanted to zoom in into some of the photos that you've shown. But the Miro, I mean, you guys have the link to the Miro board as well.
I have one simple question, especially seeing, you know, the video and then even these again close up. If you think at the end it'll stay more as a cladding or a kind of, you know, topping to the canopy, or whether it would be at any point inhabitable, you know, just because when you zoom in on those photos, which I think are really beautiful, and I love the process, they seem so spatial to me. Like it seems like you could scale them in a whole number of ways and start to think about, you know, moving through these and around these. So I'm just curious right now whether over top of you or more flattened kind of against, you know, like a facade or cladding, like just what you're thinking about that. It's just the photos seem so spatial, and also just even speak again, like that there wouldn't even just be one scale to deploy this, but there could be a couple of ways to look at it.
Yeah, I definitely have been kind of looking at both. That's why I wanted to try it, like with the textiles kind of folded in on themselves, see what shapes I can make versus the taut or the flat. I think from here is where I really start deciding which way to go. But I do think it's really interesting, the idea of them being inhabitable in some way, because they or at least, you know, in the renders, they're very spacious. And I think it could be interesting.
I love the, oh, please go ahead.
Oh, second. I'll try to be quick. Just, I think one of the earlier comments about continuing to work in the physical might also be helpful here. Hopefully I'm not leading you kind of astray, because I think whereas the right part of this image starts to show some kind of like thoughtfulness about integrating it into the existing kind of material that's there, the kind of the left side seems, even though it's kind of like this very interesting image about this, like almost like this like knitting pasta, kind of just like heavy onto the thing, that already suggests a kind of form work itself that could be more integrative. And it seems like when you're working with it by hand and tactilely, it's so kind of carefully and rigorously integrated that if the kind of the real structures that are existing there continue to be worked on as such, you would just naturally come to its like resolve or end with it. And then the only other thing I can think of too is that when you're integrating sort of materials in a kind of context, to think about light also as a material. And I'm wondering what would even happen kind of like diffractively underneath that shed, or how light is knit into or weaved into this process, whether it's just through like the photovoltaics, but also the other effectual conditions that would be present here. Because it's California, there's light, there's a lot of things are going to happen once you start weaving in and out.
Definitely, yeah. In the asset review, it was just easier to do with paper. I had openings in the paper knit. And then I found when you're actually knitting, it's hard to kind of cut these holes out without everything falling apart. But I do agree. I do want some sort of light coming through, shadows, just play with the light for sure. Yeah.
Lauren, I wonder if it isn't a question of maybe incorporating some of your earlier paper studies with the sort of yarn to be able to achieve maybe some more of those like structured openings. Like I wonder if you might need like another sort of material in your like tool set to get at the different sort of qualities you're looking for.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I really enjoy like the physical making of the models and kind of playing around with all the different things. So I think that would be a good thing to look into.
Yeah, to Nancy's point, I mean, that I could see those paper studies becoming a kind of scaffold, right?
Mhm.
Which controls the way you begin dressing the scaffold and kind of applying that to the building. So you can get loose parts or part that is more taut. You're almost kind of relooming the facade in a way, right?
Yeah.
And I would do that as a physical study. The physical models are fantastic. I would not try and replicate that digitally. In fact, I think the best way to approach this would be to kind of build that scaffold out of like the paper studies, and then dress those. Get a decent size model together, and then just scan it, and then I think bring that in digitally. And that way, you can really get a clear sense of like the material behavior is really, really something that is going to be difficult to, I think, mimic and simulate. And you don't need like just go past it. Make the model, scan it, bring it in digitally, and then you can kind of render it with all its color and glory.
I agree. I think
She was going to do that today. No, Lauren? That was the plan.
I agree with Jeff's point. I think in sort of designing the sort of scaffolding or the initial loom for yourself, you also could develop something that you can design beyond just sort of like awning or just a sort of simple canopy, to start to think about how this system might start to integrate into the interior and start to divvy up interior space.
Yeah, definitely.
I love the idea of the construction of the loom. And I was thinking that, the Haley Jorgensen images that you had at the beginning were set such a high bar for thinking about how the textile could become three-dimensional and structural. And I think that you have to sort of honor that. I totally agree that your work can continue physically, but I think that you would want to be working it with different kinds. I'm thinking about rebar, which effectively can be woven in thread, right? Other ways of thinking about how do you have a sort of set of, much like the conversation we had about softness at the very beginning review, but what are the different ranges of thread that you have that have different like tensile qualities, thicknesses, some that like I think you should be getting like wire for you to work with, as well as thin thread or thicker yarn, like a kind of a range of pliabilities thicknesses to be able to think about the entire thing as something that is certainly, you have to get rid of the Frank Gehry thing that goes away. That goes, and you are now reconstructing something that's filling up the space. The spatial points are right on. I think I totally agree. I don't know how big this thing is going to get. This has a huge parking lot. You can take over everything. Like, I think that how it evolves is kind of up to you, but I would say that you would be certainly thinking about, I think, the idea about the loom or the loom or the scaffold, or just the idea of kind of structure as such, through the ideas of rebar seem so in front of you, and it'd be so beautiful for you to take it fully on. You don't have to rely on another support structure. You are creating both of those things through the woven language. And I think I think this project is about pleasure. And I think it'd be really pleasurable for you to continue to work physically for as long as you can, to learn. And that's where the knowledge, I think you're developing knowledge there. So I would definitely not see it as just like one little thing to step towards, and then you're going to work on it really intensely through scripting in a digital format. Fine, maybe, okay, if you want to, but also this is your thesis, and you're forming knowledge in this way. I think it's incredible.
Thank you.
I agree 100%, Lauren. I wanted to put, like, I like the Photoshops. I know that I'm not getting that close to them, Lauren, so we don't see the Photoshopness of them. But I think that's something you will decide. I like all the comments that you have to find, this weaving of material. But I also wanted to put this parallel of what's a typical, you got a simple box, industrial box.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the ones that are used for solar panels. Look at even the most advanced solar energy company. Look what it does. Same stuff. I mean, Tesla should have your roof. No, you should sell it to Tesla after you finish September. But I think that this is what you're challenging. You're going against this thing. That is that kind of endless solar panel plate. And then really bringing something else. So I think that I love the untangledness, the hyperness. I think that Nate said you can inhabit them. But I also like, and I remember the comments that we had in the vertical last semester of the tension of the loom. I think Mira was saying something like that. This is a great image as well, which would work quite amazingly horizontally here in the roof, as opposed to this horrible image of the Tesla roof. So maybe it's materials. I think Natu was writing in the chat also the issue of materials. But I think that your argument is against the right image. So what's your left image? What is that you're proposing with this method? Okay, so Adam, thank you, Lauren. That was great. Thanks everybody for all the comments. Please add more to the chat. There's always a parallel review happening in the chat. And to my 4 students that just presented, you guys did an amazing job. I always say Zoom, no Zoom. You guys continue to do great stuff. So congrats. And we move on. I mean, congrats, you're not finished. We keep moving. Thank you. So Mira, I think that our next student is
Shivani, welcome, who just flew in from India several days ago. Welcome, Shivani, back to LA.
Yes, finally.
Mm-hmm.
Really glad. Okay, so Untold Nilgiris, Tribes of the Tamil Land. So just to give an introduction, it's about a Nilgiri land, which is a hill station in the southern part of India. The map shows where India is in the world map and Nilgiri is in India. And these regions are still identified by the government as areas of poverty, landlessness, ignorance, and lack of techno-economic skills. But on the contrary, these lands are also a home to these unusual tribes, Toda, Kurumba, Kotas, and Baragas. This snapshot shows the settlement of the tribes and the site in the center in orange. This slide shows how these all the 4 tribes have relied traditionally on each other for different sources and materials. Like the Todas rely on irulas for instruments, which is used for social and ritual practices, which is very considered to be really important to the others. Like thatching materials of Kota is like they trade it with the Kurumbas for food and paintings, out of which I'm focusing on the paintings of the Kurumbas for the future of the project. And on a telephonic conversation with a resident of the Kurumba tribe, these were her exact words. We have lived on this land for long, and it is our duty to tell the stories of our land to the future generation. We strive to do it through our artwork. So these are some of the artworks of the Kurumba tribes, majorly taking inspiration from the paintings, artworks by the Nilgiri tribes. The project finds evidences of the past lives lived by the people, and these paintings depict and tells us a story about their everyday life and mainly about their social ritual practices. And going deep into these paintings and the history about who painted them and where they painted on, the men and the family started it as a social activity and later became commercial and for money. And they were mostly painted on parchment paper as they sourced locally, and originally they drew it with burnt twigs and colored the art with the resin that they got from the kino tree, which is a medicinal tree, and therefore they found it safe to be painted on. And how did it start and about the colors and materials? The priest of the village started painting them on the temple walls before they had these stone deities, and they were majorly minimal in style. And they were also, before they could start off in a parchment paper, they were applied to the cow dung prepared walls, and nowadays it's painted on a plaster and the paper for selling and for commercial uses. And if you see these paintings, there are like majorly 4 elements that actually stand out. That is the flora and fauna, the humans, the architecture, and the landforms. About the people, they're always in the moment, as they find it. The reason was that they find the farming really joyful and the work that they do really happy. And also there is always a tree that is next to an architectural object. It's believed that the trees protect them from the external forces and provides them with shelter. And the architectural and in these paintings, the last element comes the architecture, where there are these raised platforms, multiple terraces, excavation of solid form, and petroforming. From the observation of these elements in these paintings, where these 4 things that were formed: landforms, architecture, flora, fauna, and humans. And these were some of the assets and the objects that I derived from these paintings and their architectural forms. Taking the research into account, the program focuses on a socio-cultural space which brings communities together and these tribal cultures together. These objects for various social elements such as markets, ritual spaces, performing arts spaces, and workshop spaces. The following slide are my drawings interpreting the objects in the same style as the paintings of the Kurumba tribes. The first slide showing contour of the slide in 2D, and then adding people adding people, the second element. The third element is the flora and fauna, mainly the kino trees and eucalyptus trees and the perennial grasses. And then some of the architectural assets that I found interpreting from the paintings. And all these things put together sit on one drawing where the trees, the humans, and the land are in 2D and the architectural objects are in 3D. And this is my second prototype, where a different set of natural dye colors and different set of assets and some changes in the landscapes are formed. And finally are the prototype and material research and techniques that I did the physical experimentation for the to proceed to the final presentation. So these are some of the dry straw braiding arrangement of rocks, which is seen as an architectural element in these paintings, and leaf braiding, bamboo sheet braiding and weaving, and natural dye making out of these plants and flowers and some barks, and using flour for pigmentation for the thickness of the paints. So with these techniques and the 2D drawing that I produced, I look forward to take it into a final as a physical model using these material research and techniques.
Thank you, Shivani. Oh, Shivani, can you open up the Miro board so people have some things to look at while they talk? Thank you.
I wonder, one thing, I think it was, clear we were talking about, translating the kind of materiality, identifying the elements. But one thing, when you get to the drawings where you start to place the architectural elements, and maybe this was in the one slide that was like breaking out some of their qualities, is there anything important about the relationships or the placement of them? Like, is there certain proximities or distances between these? Like, how do you start to arrange or kind of organize those elements? And it seems like a lot of the other things, like the materiality, like there was a lot of the specificity of the things you're kind of close reading from those drawings to make these translations. That was just one moment, because then we get to these things that you finally are kind of calling architecture. And I would want to know that same thing, which, again, maybe it was in that slide, but why are they here? How do they relate to each other? And how do they organize like the landscape? I think that's where it starts to get really charged. It's not just this kind of simple act of placing these things. I think those would also, each of those comes with, I'm sure, a set of rituals and other relationships that kind of extend far beyond just the actual kind of form of the element.
Mm-hmm. So when I was reading about these paintings, it's about how an architectural element is always in the center, and there are these people circulating it, and the periphery of the circulating people becomes the vegetation of the region, and then the landforms. But when it comes to different paintings, it varies from one painting to another, but the goal is always people are around the architectural element, and then a tree is always around the built object. So that's how the arrangements are formed usually.
I mean, it might be something to unpack there, that here you're starting to take elements from like multiple paintings that have either one act or one object or one event, and you're starting to make, I mean, it's more of like an urban condition moving from a kind of single object or institution. Like each of these represents probably much, again, like a whole kind of set of acts and behaviors and people that are using them. So that really changes things, that now, yeah, like in space, it becomes multiples. It's not one painting anymore. It's multiple points of view, multiple events, and how are you starting to kind of like organize those in space and time, which, I think that becomes really interesting, that you move from the like centrality of one painting when now you're collapsing like multiple paintings into this scene or this arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with Nate's comments. I think it is going to be helpful when you're presenting to actually talk about the sort of urbanism that you're developing based off of these paintings and these traditions. Because I think like that is sort of just your explanation there, I think is sort of like the perfect like elevator pitch to really get people into this. And so I think my question for you moving forward is how, I know you mentioned you're like interested in sort of developing these as a physical, or developing this sort of landscape as a physical model. And I'm just curious, like what sort of techniques you plan on using for those, or what materials you're actually planning on using. Is it the sort of traditional like grasses and things that you've shown, or are you developing your own sort of set of or your own sort of material palette?
I'm planning on using the locally sourced materials that's actually present in the Nilgiri region. So I've been collecting straw bales and some bamboos and like dry grass that's locally sourced, and nothing that I'm forming. Like it's more like I have formed a set of materials that's locally sourced there. So I want to use those in my physical model, because it would actually, it will be a learning experience for me how they would work in a
right. So I think maybe to push the project even further, maybe it's a question of sort of using those traditional materials in a way that they aren't traditionally used, to create like to sort of take the sort of source material, right, and give it your own sort of interpretation or understanding or process of working with those same materials, right? Because you're creating this new type of urbanism, and so I think in creating a new sort of material relationship that'll sort of reinforce your thesis some more.
I really love the translation of the reference material into your own images. For me, it's really kind of reflective of some of the work of Ian Chang, who would kind of using Unity and game engines to formulate particular interactions between non-playable characters as a means to kind of identify certain aspects of society, how people interact. And so when you're going through the kind of slides of the construction of the image itself, like trees are kind of populated within a specific place, and the construction of a building within a specific place, I think that's really where the project comes to life for me. And so to watch this unfold as perhaps like a small slideshow or an animation, I think would be really kind of remarkable. And I'll just throw in a link to a video of Ian's work so you can take a look at it.
Jeff, I love that reference. And I also really love the comments, Natu and Nate, about location, about urbanism, placement, things like that. And I think that I wonder whether or not what you guys as a kind of group think about moving towards the physical model as a kind of single space of seeing this project. My sense is that the physical model will always hold you at a certain idea about scale, because you're working with non-abstracted materials. It will only exist really productively at a one-to-one, whereas what's beautiful about the drawing is that you can zoom out and see things at a different scale. And so I wonder, like, the idea of the animated drawing that, like, where people gather around something and let's say a building that kind of would like slide and slide and kind of nestle into or around the landscape and then populate, and like the way the project could actually be seen. Maybe we need to see two different spaces of representation, one which is these physical tests that you're doing, and then another, a sort of abstracted space that understands it much more of kind of as an urban and social construction. I don't know that those things can all come together at the level of physical model. It seems to me that it would always kind of fall back to problems of scale and craft, like given the time frame, given your own like access to all kinds of things, right? So I don't know what you guys think, but I'm that would be my first instinct looking at where the work is right now.
I mean, I think Shivani, I think the research is great. What I'm finding that I think that I would need from you is you, you know, like I see the research, the references, but I think the project for the thesis, I think we need more of you. Like, what is your contribution through your design abilities? So I think that you're building up the knowledge. It would be nice to see how you implement the knowledge in a more hybrid manner. I think that, goes a bit to what we were saying with Lauren earlier on, and like she has this yarn, she has this material, but how you enact it into a thesis project. So I think in your case, one thing, and I just put Mughal, because Mughal Persian miniatures that are similar to the miniatures that you've shown, the miniature paintings. But what is also, the Persian miniatures were also ways of growing the empire by mapping the land. But the land was mapped in a way that it was so imprecise. That they put a tree, the tree was bigger than the river, for example, like the size of the tree was the same thickness as the river. And so those imperfections are part of the type of representation. Many years later, Mughal miniature paintings are used by Rankulkas to represent Park La Villette, competition entry. So you can do that. So I think that what it would be great is that you do some vignettes of your projects. And maybe it's not a full analog drawing, but it's a hybrid, of things that you can see, the materiality. I thought that these were photographed. When I saw this drawing that you did, I thought that it was like Photoshop of in between Illustrator and then image photograph. So maybe I think you have to find your own drawing style. Again, there's a whole story of how, Park La Villette went from a Persian miniature to a European, heavily westernized drawing type, going against Western traditions of perspectival space. So in a way, it's like breaking down with his own history by borrowing from another history. I think that you're in your own history and you're unraveling new material. So I think that these drawings are not yours yet. I think you have to make them yours. I was circling that because I would do a close-up vignette of every one of your assets. And then, because in this far away, it's hard to see what it's made of and what colors you have. This is a great image. I'm not sure if I see correctly. That's a great image. And then build one of your assets in a vignette, not in an analog, in like even vignette, like you build it there. And then you focus on one and maybe you do another one. Maybe you have 3 vignettes for final thesis and that's it. That's all you need.
I'm thinking about, I guess maybe the last, well, maybe probably all of them, who knows, but especially with the kind of last couple of comments, I think there is, when we look at the, let's say the Mughal like illustrations also, there is a cartography. It's a kind of imaginary cartography. And that's not to say, and one could also think of the development of European cartographic methods as also a kind of form of an imaginary vignette that prioritizes a certain set of relationships and empirics over others. And in a certain way, the Mughal one does too. And it might actually be quite calibrated and precise by the metrics that matter for that particular imaginary. And so in this case, it feels like it's maybe somewhere in between where it's kind of following some of the prioritized metrics of one world and then kind of the other or whatever, but maybe it is the time to take like full on agency and determine what those conditions are for this imaginary, this world, this condition of being, and like follow them all the way through the way that you understand to be fit, as opposed to another one, or trying to mesh them up together. So even like, I think the hybrid idea is super interesting because it's not about a rigorous one-to-one material tectonic. It's not about a translation of a topology. It's not any of these things, but somewhere in between those are the priorities that need to be like enhanced or like, I don't know, privileged in the organization of the rest of the image.
Thanks, you guys. I think the last minute, if there's any other final comments, and Shivani, if you wanted to contribute anything as well. But I think this has been really, really helpful. I think that Shivani, you've made a lot of gains right now, and I think the idea of trying to zoom in and see some of this stuff, kind of commit to what this stuff is, and try and figure out what your own way of drawing it. And I love the idea of the mapping and that being a space of imaginary as well, is really productive. I also really want to understand how these drawings can mature, right, and become more confident. I think that there's moments of confidence in it and strangeness. So I think well done. But yeah, much to kind of develop. We're going to go on to the next student, who's Jasper. And Zuleika, I think we're going to be losing you in a little bit, but thank you so much for being with us. Thank you. We really, really, really appreciated your feedback.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we see you in September. We're not in charge, so we don't decide that, but it'd be great. We'll ask for you. We will ask for you with Mira.
Thank you. It would be an honor.
All right, Jasper, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, ready. Hi, everyone. I'm Jasper. Thank you all for being here. So my presentation is through a 5-minute film. I just put the link in the chat. I would like to ask if everyone could go watch it separately. And then if someone could let me know whenever y'all are done, I can open up the Miro board and we can open up the discussion from there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Jasper.
Oops. Beautiful movie, Jasper.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have an initial question. Your model at the end of the film that you presented, do you have photos of what it looks like, or sort of from the outside view? I know all the shots are sort of done in the interior, and they're great. I'm just curious what the entire thing looks like now.
Yeah, I do have photos of it. I just didn't include it in my presentation. I guess because I wanted to keep the sense of scale kind of like obscure, you know, like I was really focusing on the interior parts of the model.
I think that, I mean, everyone's already saying this, but the models are really beautiful. And maybe that's part of it, is like the allure right now of not knowing the whole thing. You're just kind of placed in this. And it, I think, is doing what you're kind of alluding to earlier, where like your senses become heightened. And I think these photos even do that as well, because you're just in this thing, and there's clear kind of difference of material and color. I wonder if there's one thing you could talk about, like, because on one hand, there's like the exposing of systems, but I think you're doing something more than that. And you were kind of saying you want to celebrate it, you know? So I think it's how also you differentiate it from like, you know, high-tech work of like the late 70s or the early 80s, where it was just like exposing HVAC or exposing structure. Like this seems like it goes beyond that. And some of that is even in things like the materiality. Like these bottom model photographs aren't just the plumbing that we saw earlier when you took the shot, you know, in the kind of wall cavity. Like there's something more you're doing that's not just exposing it, you're like heightening it, or it's becoming something else, you know? And I wonder if there's something, you know, some way you would start to kind of frame that, or talk about that, you know, because on one hand, you could do this project, it could just look like what was between those walls. Like you'd kind of expose that, we'd see the fluids, the kind of messy PVC, but there's a whole host of decisions that have been made between that photo and these model photographs, you know, and I wonder how you would start to speak to like those qualities that you're going after, and how you're, you know, kind of calibrating that.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's like a very clear interest in like a specific type of material or material quality that you're not sort of getting at in your presentation in the film. I'm wondering, just a sort of aside, the bubble wrap, is that a garment that was sort of constructed for this, or was that simply, I'm curious if I'm just curious about that sort of performance, right? Or the idea of performance in general, and how you see that relating to the sort of space that, or that sort of interstitial like plumbing wall space, right?
Yeah, that was definitely a whole performance that I had conducted in my bathroom. Yeah, I made the bubble wrap garment, and yeah, just started playing with light. And I noticed that this atmosphere was like created once I, you know, saw these photos of myself. And that's kind of like, I mentioned it in my film, that's kind of like where my project got its momentum, was from that performance that I had did. That was from last semester. And the idea that the body can actually like create these environments through garments, or through the atmosphere of the room that we're in, or the materials that are surrounding us. That's definitely a main, you know, point of my thesis, or like what I'm interested in like pursuing in terms of yeah, the space and the environment.
I think an artist that you might be interested in looking at their work is Hannah Levy. I can send her name. There's let me find the image here, but there's something about those photographs and sort of thinking about the body and sort of wrapping the body in a kind of plastic material that makes me think of this piece. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot here. I think this project is, this thesis is super interesting. I think there's like so many different parts to get into that, yeah, there's a lot here for sure.
Yeah, to continue that sentiment, there's a lot to love about this project. I mean, the section is just, it's absurdly amazing. Like just the confluence of body and architecture and plumbing, right, is kind of reimagined as a continuity, right? Can you zoom in on the section? And and then also taking the section of the performance and then kind of reimagining the performative aspects of architecture as performance, right? And then to kind of further, you know, elaborate that on that in relation to Nate's point, opposing, or not opposing, but maybe separate from, you know, British high tech, in which mechanical systems are indexed through coloration and through exposure on the exterior of a building. These become, I don't know, like the zoom in shots of the model become very performative. There's a lot going on. I'm almost kind of awestruck with the idea of just using the kind of zoom ins of the interior of the model. And like there's this desire to want to categorize, to acknowledge, to understand, to get the kind of aerial view of the model. And I'm wrestling with that. And I think your decision to not show us that is really in line with the project. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like you're pulling away from this kind of like Victorian era need to really categorize and define and understand things as a kind of object, right? And take us out of that and simply stick us into the interior of that model. Is, I think that's a really powerful move, and I don't think I would change it. I think I would keep it.
I think now I'm curious about sort of the drawing of that interior space without giving us the sort of larger context, if that could start to become something similar to what you have going on the right here, where we're seeing images and you know, plumbing information and like section or like plans. I think I'm not even sure like what all the sort of graphics are, but that the sort of images of your model could start to be represented or sort of drawn that way as well.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I wanted to bring you to, Jasper, and I put the Maison de Verre in the chat, but there's more, 1920s, and there's a book also there, 1920s obsession with the toilet, you know, because it didn't exist. You know, you didn't have a bathroom in your house. I found these amazing articles about Le Corbusier was obsessed with the toilet. Because he, you know, not for what you would imagine, but because he thought it was a sculpture piece. You know, he thought that this porcelain object, you could, you know, like it didn't exist before. It's so beautiful that you shouldn't just hide it in a kind of you know, in a kind of back room. You should like have it in your living room. So if you look at many of his projects, the toilet is like brought up to the front or it's detached. I think they said that he separated with his wife because he wanted to put the toilet in the living room. But other than that, you know, there's this obsession. I look at also, you know, if you look at Duchamp, you know, there's a whole dialogue there. You know, he ended up making a vincitore, you know, a kind of urinary into a sculpture. I mean, I don't know, maybe you did that. You did that in thesis prep. I'm not sure. But there's this thing of like elevating that. Another thing is interesting is that in the early 20th century, you didn't have embedded plumbing in the walls like we have now. That is like so obvious. Like, you know, everything is exposed. It's like air plumbing. So in the Maison de Verre, in that one that I showed that photo, he had the heating for to wash your hands, to wash, all exposed. And there are pipes coming from the toilet to the bathroom, everything. You could see the network of pipes. And that was, it ended up being an aesthetic, like what is the aesthetics of plumbing? Exposed plumbing. It's not hidden like we have in every single house that you see. Imagine that you take out your house, you just cut it up and expose all the pipes. I thought that this in-section is one thing, but I love the models because they start to say, no, you actually expose them. You might make them not only PVC or copper they used to be, maybe transparent. And there's something about, like making a kind of maison de verre bathroom with new materials like transparent PVC and then, and so on. And so I think that in a way, your project is the same question, 1920s, which is, hygiene was, this thing of the discovery of hygiene, washing your hands and so on, that we have recovered again, 1920, last year after our pandemic. Also the pandemic of the 1920s got a renewed necessity of the bathroom and so on. And so I think you have 2020, 2021, a renewed understanding of what is that space, for you, it's not only hygiene, it's also social issues, like this whole country is in conflict because of access to the bathroom. I mean, this is unbelievable. And so I think this idea of like hygiene, access, kind of, I think it's amazing. I think it's a great program that you have, but I would like see it both in this two, like untangling the bathroom, just take it apart and put it back together, which looks like these models are doing, like the end of the 20th century, it's kind of hiding the bathroom again. If you look at the Roman bath, there was so much more, even in other countries, in other continents, the bathroom or the sauna is a place of social space. It's a kind of social space. I think in Venice also. I've seen those with my kids, when you have a kid that is kind of running desperate to kind of go to the bathroom. So I think that, amazing site. I love that idea of the site there, because you have everything. You have families, you have, beachgoers, tourists, and homeless. Everybody uses that space. They might sleep there. Sometimes you find, a homeless sleeping there. So sometimes it becomes a mini house. So I would say that I think you get a lot of things. I would untangle that, expose that, and then start to make drawings and a model of like that space. What is the bathroom? What is that space of the bathroom accessible to everybody? I'll take the drawings of Le Corbusier, but he had to end up doing one bathroom for his wife, and then him was in the living room. His wife had to be separated. So what is the access? what is the access, of that, of that place of privacy that becomes public space, and it's accessible to anybody. So yeah.
Sorry, Florencia. Jasper, I think part of your project or something that your project might be able to like really get at is the sort of destigmatization of like bodily functions, right? Like I wanted to mention the sort of audio that was in your film that we watched, right? Like there was moments where there's the toilet flushing, we hear water running, we hear someone like brushing their teeth, right? And like those are things that we're all very familiar with, like actions we do all the time, every day, any kind of person, regardless of gender or anything like that. And so I wonder if you can take that and really like drive that sort of point home, and thinking to your final presentation, like maybe there's a sort of audio component or something that goes along with it, because I think that was such a sort of key part of the film that we watched, and I would hate for that to just go away. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I want to make some kind of like immersive experience. That's like the ultimate goal for final. So we'll see if that happens.
Thanks, you guys. I would say that, I think what the first question that Nate posed, which is, what is it that what is this language? What are the things on a formal level that you're working through? And I would just add, now that you've done all this work and something that we've been talking about, but that seems to kind of now kind of become very, you have a visual language from the bubble wrap outfit to the almost like bubble wrap interiors, this kind of liquid, iridescent, translucent, reflective, kind of released space. This is vocabulary that starts to describe maybe some of the things you're working on and how to think about the project as something of trying to lose the edges of things. So it's a kind of an anti-object architecture. It's about kind of losing the edges, dissolving the edges of let's say, whatever traditional boundaries between the interior and the exterior of the wall, let's say, trying to lose all edges. I love Florencia, the comment about sort of unraveling, releasing the kind of all the stuff that's been repressed in the walls, unleashing it, unfurling it, and in some ways trying to get at this architecture that is kind of fully kind of atmospheric and about kind of losing edges. So I think that there's material things that are doing that. There's ideas about translucency and reflectivity and surfaces that are like super complex but also translucent. There are things that are happening, and I think it'd be good for you to start to identify maybe some of what that is, so to continue to work through it, to become more kind of precise in terms of scale. Right now it's kind of this amazing kind of garden you kind of produce, almost like this garden where all edges are sort of lost. So I think that being able to start to talk about what it is that you're working on, that space, what is kind of feels a little bit like a gauzy discotheque kind of space. What is this stuff? What are the terms of that? Seems like it's a really good question for you to be kind of articulating. The formats, I think you've kind of got it. Kind of how to work through it from a format standpoint. The question is, what are its terms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you guys, this was amazing. I'm so excited that this was, as I think that Jeff said, a lot to love about the project. So word. Next up is, help me, who is it? Darshini.
Yeah, hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Darshini. I'm an MR2 student. Yeah. So my thesis is oriented around the site Inglewood Oil Fields, Los Angeles. I was in India when I started working on the project initially, and I encountered it digitally, and then I came back again, and then I encountered the site physically. So yeah. I landed on this site when I came across these reading about these projects by Nora Purifoy and Ella Natsui, where the ideologies are behind are politics and value embedded on materials, waste, and how to reevaluate and recontextualize them in visual aspects. Yeah, and my project questions the contemporary status of the post-oil in an oil extraction field. I was looking at a passage of resistance to highly programmed environment, but rather move towards a lesser tread over the lands. So the site is bound by La Cienega Boulevard, Stalker Street, and Jefferson Boulevard, and other roads. The site is filled with myriad of infrastructure and resources, and these are different maps which separates each layer of the whole landscape. This map is just a sample which focuses on a particular area along the Stalker Street, showing utility pole locations, electrical transmission towers, gas plants, fences, pipelines, and so on. So these elements are quintessential in the setting of my project. Apart from visually visible resources, I noticed other strong aspects of the site as well: the sound, reverberations, the motions, and the smell lurking over around the site. I was able to capture some of the field recordings, and these are some of the sample recordings. So since the site is filled with radiation, fence lines, and other bounding elements, I was able to have a close encounter at a particular area along the Stalker Street, and I was able to digitally construct that particular zone. I was approaching this the scale of the site as a whole to the scale of the piece of the area of the site and to the scale of the pump jacks. In my project, the scenario of post-fracking is taken into consideration, but the motions of the machinery are still in function. Yeah, so I was trying to see how to integrate the overground and underground system workings of the site to try to harness the oscillating motions of the pump jacks, the sounds and reverberations, and visualizations of those sounds was one of the criteria I was looking at. So these were some of the tests performed to embody, capture the dynamic motions of the pump jacks, and also treating each infrastructure as an auditory source on its own. So taking advantage of all the infrastructure as a source of sound, amplifying them to more spaces, and also generating visual aids on notification of these activities present on this zone was how I started looking at molding the spaces. So these membranes introduced act as zealots for emphasis of treating the landscape as an instrument. So the landscape becomes a place for harnessing and generating several energies. The material over the jacks react according to the dynamic motions of the pump jacks, be it the sound of the electricity amped by the power lines, noise from the motors, all are encomposed at the extraction zones or the pump wells. I wanted to emphasize on also the after hours as well, to stagnate the life of the landscape and thereby acting as a node for the whole neighborhood of Inglewood. Baldwin Hills, the idea of spilling of light. And it's also looking at the embodiments over the pump jacks sectionally, how they could mold a space and with different materials, synthetic materials. So this is a shot from looking away from the particular zone, zooming out and looking at the site with all membranes assembled after hours, and to see how the light aspects would be. And I want to progress this to a park where I want to develop screening spaces where these membranes contribute to the overall experience for the public. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Shivani. Can you hold it maybe at a couple of images so that we can have a conversation with some pictures in front of us?
Yeah, I can share the mirror board.
When you were, maybe you said this at some point, well, when you were saying the public at the end, is it specific in terms of how it's programmed for what's going on here? Like, is it a place for, is it like a sculpture garden that's more, all ages in the day? Is it something that's more club-like or even secretive, like at night? I'm just curious, like what that public is, because that last image was like, it seemed kind of very tame characters, like almost watching a screening, where some of these other ones seem to speak to like different eras of taking over industrial areas and allowing them to have like a nightlife or a kind of like underground culture like in those spaces. And so I'm wondering how much this becomes like public park that everyone knows about versus this like strange place you go at night and there's like these pulsating forms and these strange lights. I think and maybe it's both, but I was just curious, like if you had started to have some specificity, like in who its audience is or how open that is.
Yeah, so initially I was looking towards how to use all the machinery like as a landscape project. But yeah, it's more of a public park which functions throughout the day and through the night. And the endless functioning contributes to the energies derived contribute to the endless activities around the landscape.
I have a question. I'm wondering, are the sort of interventions or the jackets, or I don't know what language we want to use for the sort of covers you've put on the pump jacks, but are you imagining that this is sort of the evolution of the pump jack jackets? Yes, that's great. I'm wondering if that's the sort of, like, if this is how you see that space being used once the pump jacks are no longer operating, or are these like, are they moving in these jackets? Like I guess I'm trying to understand like how you see this fitting the needs of the community, or interacting with the community that it's surrounded by, right? Like I think like Nate's question about like program specificity is super important, because I don't know that it's there, and I think that's what your project like really needs, right? Is to be like incredibly specific as to what activities are going to take on or are going to happen in this space. Like, who are you designing this for? And you know, how do you see them interacting with these sort of these elements that you've added to this landscape?
Tarsini, this is great. I love this project. Let me see if I see you. You know, I've seen it, you know, I've seen it. I put two examples there, the termite covers, and also the jumping castle for kids, you know. Because I think, so you tap into existing, I think to Nato's question, you do tap to an existing program type, you know, the program type of a playground or like a birthday party mixed with an isolated house that, you know, has a soft cover. You know, these pumps, what is the name you said, you guys said in the chat, the pump shacks. That is the signature of capitalist power and the destruction of the city. That's it. If you look at LA, if you find an earlier photo of LA, the whole city was full of them. I'm sure you found those. I mean, they were in the middle of La Ciénaga and Wilshire, La Brea and Sunset, everywhere, you know, like their lines, you know better. I mean, there's a line of pump shacket that goes from downtown all the way to, you know, Baldwin Hills. So you have it. Those are the kind of whatever what we have left. It used to be in, it used to be a landscape of these machines. And this is not the only city that this had. So many cities were like this, you know, landscapes of this, you know. And so I think that this is a residue of the advancement of capitalism, of oil culture, and the cities that we lived on that are not all cities, that are new cities like LA. And they were dominated, the land was dominated by this, but this, you know, by oil companies. Before it became urban, you know, before the cities were urban, there were so many things, ranchos, and then there were oil fields. La Brea tar pits was full of oil pits, oil field machines. So I think that this place is an oasis of like these things that are still left, you know. So it's a little bit like the tar pits that are left there. And so I think that converting them into this new space, I agree with the comments. What is this new space? You know, how are they moving? You know, how they activate? Is this a park? Is this part of the public realm? Is this something from LAX that you see when you left, you know, this kind of night views? I think you seem the movie, the night movie theater, I think you seem to be tapping onto too much of traditional exercises on what is a urban space. I think you have to rethink that, and you have to look at them with new eyes, you know, almost as if you reactivate. Do you shift oil energy with other means, renewable energy? I mean, I don't know, what's the question there with the oil field in today's question of climate and, you know, and a necessity of rethinking or, you know, or need of oil. So I think there's a lot more there that you have it. And the project, it's really, these night views are so amazing.
Yeah, the night views are the night views are fantastic. The whole, I mean, yeah, there's a lot here. It really, you know, it kind of reminds me of the the New Year's Eve ball in Times Square, right? It's both the kind of instrument to measure time. It's also kind of instrumental in a way. There's always a kind of musical score that accompanies it. There's a countdown, and it's also a kind of spectacle, right? And I'm wondering, in terms of, you know, Nate's, and I think the rest of the sentiment right now is trying to decipher what the program specificity is. And I don't know if this is, maybe the obvious thing is a kind of countdown to the switch between fossil fuels, right? The kind of end of this landscape, and the kind of re-instrumentalizing it as instrument, right? And then kind of like proliferating it with people and becoming this kind of, I don't know, a very kind of temporal event. Yeah, like something that is happening over time. It's both measured, you're kind of, and I could almost imagine the video of this, like the electrical current, the noise starting to become you know, further apart or spaced out and fizzle out over time, right? And it kind of just ending. And this is really, yeah, a kind of a really beautiful performance of that transition.
I think that's great, and it's maybe a great place, unless there's other comments, because I do think that the question of when this is taking place, where this is taking, when this is taking place has been a question that we've been talking about for some time. Like, oh, it's going to this is imagined in 60 years. This is imagined in 50 years. This is maybe like your point. This is something that Darshini, something we had talked about at another moment, which is that maybe it's you are actually measuring right now, and that there's things that can start to happen right now, and you're thinking about this over time. So I really love the where the conversation sort of has led you to. I mean, your visual production is incredible. The longing for a more specific set of scenarios and narrative is very true, right? I think that's where really a lot of your work has to start to. You have to be more. I think you have more confidence in establishing what that is, and take some risks over what that is. I think that people have demonstrated have put some things on the table today, as well as making you feel more confident about not having to just repopulate it as something that we know, but something else, like this kind of massive. And is it human-centered or non-human centered? I think is a big question in what you've produced. So thank you, Darshini. I don't know if you have any thoughts or questions. We are going to shift gears.
Thank you for your comments. I really agree that specificity and program narrowing down is very important at this stage. Yeah, thank you.
Great, and I've been pulling all the links too, guys. So we're going to move on to Lauren. You know, we are 20 minutes behind. So Lauren will be our penultimate student, and then Liang Fan will finish us off. We'll be finishing at 5:20. So for those critics who are with us, if you can stay on till 5:20, that'd be great. But if you can't and you need to leave at 5, then we certainly understand. But with that, Lauren, go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so this is a thesis that aims to disrupt the architectural performance of conformity within the California post-war single-family home in an attempt to support nuance through subversion. The popularity of the American suburb mainly grew in the post-war period, where mass-produced houses would become the stage where middle-class values got reinforced and expressed architecturally. Racist covenants, along with government intervention, kept the market exclusive to the white nuclear family, so therefore the design of the typical home came to embody values that expressed the occupant's proximity to the middle-class whiteness, such as cleanliness, social status, and assimilation. Fast forward to today, the suburbs no longer resemble the way 1950s and 60s sitcoms have come to portray them. As of 2010, 51% of immigrants reside in the suburbs. This was reflected in my experience growing up there with my 2 immigrant parents and 3 older sisters. So what I realized is that there is this discrepancy between the values encoded into the built environment and the way we lived our daily lives. So to better understand how these subtleties operated, I began my research while reading Diane Harris's book, Little White Houses. Through drawing and walking around my parents' neighborhood, I began to dissect what I saw. I noticed that the architectural performance of fitting in operates heavily on the exterior. One can see this in the repetition of familiar ornamentation, such as faux finishes, shingles, pitched roofs, and pastels. Conformity also exists in the emphasis on front-facing entrances and garages, as well as the overall postures that create a sense of display and surveillance. Plants serve as social signifiers due to the fact that at some point there was a shift where plants in the front lawn were exclusively ornamental, while plants in the backyard were more likely to be agricultural, because utilizing land to nourish the body was negatively tied to the Great Depression era. In addition to this, Diane Harris points out how the lawn operates as this space of visibility and surveillance, where one must constantly maintain their lawn in order to not be seen as dirty by their neighbors. Lastly, Harris discussed how at another point in time, specifically in California, storage spaces such as attics and basements disappeared because crowded living signaled ethnic living. So with nowhere to store sentimental memories and artifacts, a quote that stuck with me was, "The post-war home became the framework for forgetting past lives, a requirement for fast assimilation." So with all of this in mind, I thought to myself, how can I now subvert this to where instead of the house being the framework that the inhabitant has to adjust to, what if the inhabitant and their values are the framework that the architecture nourishes? So I started with my parents and talked to them separately about their lives before moving to the US. My mom mentioned having fond memories of a second-story courtyard where her and her sister would play in her childhood home in Mexico City. My dad recalled memories of drinking tea and reading the newspaper with his family back in Cairo out on the apartment balcony that wrapped around the side. With these memories in mind, I began to test how the incorporation of these elements would disrupt the typical plan, and also observed what it meant elevationally and how that could be used as a tool to hint at the nonconformity within. After working through those atypical versions, I landed on wanting to now design a house that would accommodate a multi-general household, given that that's been an existing demographic in SoCal suburbia, and also because I felt that it best poses the nuanced attitude towards fitting in that could exist between different generations. Yeah, sorry, multi-generational. So for this type, I saw potential in creating a layout of 3 bars that get linked together by individual hallways. On the left and the right, one could imagine separate generations having their own private spaces that they can customize. The more public programs meant to bring together the generations lay in the central bar. Covered under one roof, at first glance, the building appears as one interior house. The opening up of the front shutters begin to imply a deviation from the typical plan and starts to suggest what exists on the interior. The outside flows into the inside, while the inside also has potential to flow out into these exterior hallways due to their in-between status. Having the agency to open or close the front shutters gives the occupants the ability to participate or opt out of the performance of display. In a similar way, the side patios also have this sense of agency in the way they are slightly visible from street view. Also in mind was the difference between tight space and loose space. Here I wrote a few words about what some of these tight spaces could mean. So this room is designed for the inhabitants to come together for leisure activities. This tight space suggests a sense of togetherness, while the walls allow intimate customization through the hanging of photographs, artwork, trinkets, DIY objects, or anything that holds sentimental value. One could imagine welcoming friends and extended family into this room where the inhabitants can express an extension of themselves through the objects enclosed within. This kitchen has the potential of hosting generational exchange through the process of food making. Recipes not only hold strong cultural significance, but also come with histories from within the family. And so here I started writing more about what the looser spaces could mean and what happens when spatial customization through movable walls could, like what that could start to propose. So this courtyard dining room is a place where meals are shared together, where all the occupants can nourish their bodies while also asking about how each other's days went. For big family gatherings, the movable walls could open up and the dining room can extend out into the side patios for extra hosting space. Adjacent to the dining room sits one of the two side patios. One could imagine turning this into a place where morning tea can be enjoyed, either tucked away into the comfort of the nook or pushed outward to peek out onto the street, all while still being able to see across into the other side patio. The second patio has a similar offset where one could be more public or more private. This is where outside activities can take place, such as creating a plant hub, for example. And so now at the stage I'm at and starting to develop the physical model, I guess I'm sort of looking at ways to further activate this exterior hallway, this in-between space. And also looking at different resolutions of representation and the image making to that I'm using for the project. So I guess how detailed to go and different things like that. And also kind of testing out colored versus black and white. And so that's kind of what I'm really trying to hone in on and develop. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Can you show the mural board?
Yes.
Okay, I'll begin. Hi, Lauren. Great presentation. I think that I wonder if, in order to go through consistency, you might go back and interview your parents again and get more stuff. Because it seems that you got two things. One is the courtyard, and the other one is a tea room. And I think that you need so much more, almost as if you could start asking, carpets, wallpaper, plants, flowers, tree. You know what I mean? Almost as if you did a record of stuff. Everything you need. It's almost as if, okay, so I'm going to a supermarket. I need eggs, I need flour, I need, blah, 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 blah. So do the same list. I need bricks, I need columns, I need chairs, I need, and I say, put your image, put your example there. And then you start to do your own version of all of that list. What kind of window, what kind of door, what kind of roof, what colors. I think this is, because in a way you can continue to design and, I'm eager to go in and start to tell you, why don't you do this, why don't you do that, in plan and so on. But you don't want that. I don't want to do that. I think that what you want to do is that you want to advance a little bit more. I think it's not enough with those notes that you show at the beginning, I think you set up a good recipe. Just go with the recipe all the way. You know what I mean? It's like, I remember when I was a kid, I saw this tree that I love. Or I remember, you know, like this, almost as if you're building a house of memories that are not yours. And I think that's really beautiful. And it's multi-generational. Maybe you need to do more interviews. I don't mean Mira might say enough that this is prep. I get it. Move on. Don't listen to me. So again, you don't have to listen to me. But I think that there are a lot of questions I still have. The counter of the kitchen, what is it? The refrigerator, what is it? The chairs, what are them? How big the chair? Why you have only 6 guests? You know what I mean? I mean, it seems so. Your father is from Egypt, and you say your mom is from Mexico. So you know, like, whoa, that's like, you get a lot of cultural references that you might get, and that's very rich. So I think that, you know, I mean, I remember when I visited not too long ago with some students, I took them to the Frida Kahlo Museum in Mexico, in Coyoacán, and you listen to her, it's all the memories that she has in that house. And then when she bought the house, for, you know, the father lost the house, and so she bought the house for him. And then her father lived there, the mother lived there, the husband was more kind of out. But then they extended the house. You know, they added an addition. Maybe you've been there, but they made an addition to the house that it was for her. I mean, with the also that it would help her with her issues of walking. The bedroom very special, but every room for her was a memory. And the expansion is a memory, and the garden was a memory. And, you know, like everything was something, had this narrative that she ended up painting. So I think this is a wonderful storytelling building parallel. And again, these images are black and white. Then you start to add color and the access. And I'm not sure why we have that grid those doors. You know, I think this house could be so, and then one room gets taller, because I remember that I live, you know, your dad might, I remember I live in a room that is really tall, and your room starts to get really tall. And so I think that the design, it's a little bit of a kind of a story, but then you are the architect that can make them happen, you know, with your own language. You make your language out of what you hear. I don't know, I mean, I think it, as a thesis, it's really wonderful.
Yeah, I totally agree with Florencia saying about a recipe. And it really, I mean, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. It really reminded me of a really amazing artist. His name's Rirkrit Tiravani. He's a Thai artist. And instead of producing art objects, he would use the gallery as a space of kind of social gathering. So he would make food, and he makes food, actually, still, this is an ongoing project. He makes food, and people come into the gallery, and it's all about this kind of social interaction. And so to look at the interior as a recipe, right? I really like the kind of dichotomy between the exterior suburban shell, and then the idea to kind of retransform the interior through a kind of recipe is really wonderful. And so, and then I expect in the end, this reworking will be a very kind of clear understanding of like your history, your parents' history, and this recapitulation of what interior space means, right? As a kind of opportunity to be kind of redeveloped, right? I think it would be, and then I could also imagine the kind of social gathering, because when you're asking questions about these hallways and how do I activate these hallways, I think that is the next step. I don't think you can get there without a further discussion, like Florencia was saying, with your parents, with really kind of getting the specifics, getting the list of ingredients, right? And really understanding what those are. And then I think you'll just see, it'll just kind of be apparent, you know, what that kind of interstitial space is and what it should transform into. I imagine it's going to be almost kind of like Rirkrit's interventions, in which they become these kind of really magnificent social gathering spaces. Also model stunning, but yeah, I can't wait to see color in it. I hope I get to see it again. Amazing work, Lauren.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with the previous comments. I think earlier you were like, I'm not sure how specific to get with this. I think you need to be as like specific as possible with this project. I think that's what it really wants and sort of needs. I'm curious, like in terms of color. I know because we've spoken about your project a bit before, but I think the color here is going to be super important. I think there's something about this that to me I'm thinking it needs like vibrancy, right? To sort of relay the sort of liveliness that's happening on that sort of interior, that the sort of exterior would mirror that in some way, but maybe subtly, right? To sort of still fit in and into the sort of suburban context. Um, yeah, I mean it's interesting. It's interesting that you went black and white with the photos. I think I'm curious what the colors actually are for this, or if you sort of left them as they were and just sort of snapped the images, or if like the model actually has a color and you just represented it as black and white because you're unsure of it, or whatever.
Yeah, so the model was originally following like more of like a color palette of the earlier studies that I did. But I guess just like throughout the project, I've been referencing a lot of photos of Carrie Mae Weems and just kind of like appreciating the type of like quietness that comes when you kind of mute things down to a black and white. Right. And I guess also what I was thinking about as well was sort of like how you get the stereotypical like 1950s, 60s like sitcom. And so in a way, kind of resorting back to that black and white was a way of like using that language and like subverting it to like show something different and new. But again, like it was kind of me trying to like test out different things. Like I'm still trying to navigate like what each thing sort of like implies.
Well, I think the black and white works if that's what you're sort of going for. But I think like with the Carrie Mae Weems images, there's a like very sort of specific kind of like emotion or like like intimate moment that's captured in those photos. And so I think if you're going to continue with the sort of black and white to just avoid color or sort of really double down on the sort of the black and white aesthetic, that maybe the images that you take of your model have a more sort of like one-to-one like perspectival feel rather than like a sort of aerial view, right? Like we're actually sort of in this space and can understand like how busy or sort of how like how people might be moving through it. I think like the images towards the bottom, like the bottom right, like more images like that, so we start to get a feel for the kind of the energy of the space itself, right?
Yeah, I agree.
I think the lower row of images, like the one you just zoomed in on, become interesting to me in terms of you were at one point, I think you were talking about loose and tight spaces. Those seem more dynamic and kind of pushing towards a lot of things you were saying than like the kitchen, for example, in the center. Not just because the kitchen right now seems more generic, or maybe what you would have found in some of those like initial studies of these house types, but even thinking about like the doorways, like in the lower images, we start to lose traditional domestic like door and door frame. We start like opening up a whole wall, or like multiple spaces start to overlap and come together. And so like that court, like I'm wondering if you start to look at just some of the devices of like, can you open all the doors and slide them away from like a bedroom, like you've done the court walls, but would the court still have that double door going into the kitchen? Would they be on a diagonal? Like, would you step up 6 inches, or would everything always stay level? So starting to think of like, what are these small, architectural decisions or devices that would trigger social things, or how do you really make a space, like you're saying, more loose and flexible versus more tight, and it makes me think a little bit like Robin Evans' Figures and Passages essay about shifts that happen in like hallways and door placement, and the way that had like major social implications, like in the early 20th century. But I'm wondering just, there's places I think, and especially like I'm saying, the bottom images are starting to do it for me. But then when I see the bedrooms and their doorways, I'm curious, like if things should fall back to the generic or the kind of found, or if you would start to rewire other spaces in a similar way. I think it would move towards the looseness, even back to like what you were saying about the lawn, these things that make like hard lines and divide. Like I think your project for me is more about that bottom where it's starting to lose some of that and become some other space. And I think, like you said, the word exchange, I think that becomes so loaded in terms of the multi-generational, or even just like literal things like food to space. Like I would just start to think of, not just conceptually how that happens, but like what are the architectural devices that set that up and allow that to occur.
I think we have to move on, but this has been an amazing set of comments. I think this is right on and so well deserved. I don't think I have anything else to add. I think that I'll just let the comments sit as they are. I've written a lot of comments, written a lot of notes for myself too. Thank you guys so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Looking forward to seeing it in September.
I think we're going to lose Jeff. I'm not sure, Nate, if we're going to be able to keep you, but we are going to move on to Yangfen, our last student to present.
Wonderful to be here. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for doing this. Bye.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Yangfen Xiao. I'm going to share the screen. Can you guys see my screen okay? All right. My thesis is titled Back and Forth Construction of Liminal Space Through Photographic Images. City planners have been obsessed with a blank slate. To build a new vision of utopia, we must start over. But how can we operate in limbo, one of which the past is behind us and the future is yet to come? Bess Princeton's work, Future Highway 2, capture such a pause. While the future highway is yet to be built, workers are demolishing houses to make way. Image reproduction was first adopted to study the effect of the original image, whether it is being constructed physically or digitally, and how to distinguish urban landscape from architecture. What does repetition on the same subject do in the process of image making? Next phase of the thesis focused on the chosen site. It is the old location of Washington Irving Branch Library, built in 1926 by Ellison and Ellison. Building has been boarded up, fenced, and vacant since 1990. What seemed redundant in this set of group portraits from 1956 actually produced new readings. Both photos of the library and their reproduction appear to reveal the transformation that took place. Referencing historical maps and architectural rendering, liminal space for the site is further defined between architecture and the landscape. Chain-link fence on site reinforce a soft sense of boundary, and the shallow offset of the glass plane at a different building nearby echoes plexiglass covering the library windows. Glass facade collapse space and register reflection and projection from various objects. Similar to Charles Gaines' work, Numbers and Trees, I then explore ways to scale the 6-inch acrylic box to fit on site. Film scans were printed again on transparent film sheets, and photographed in the body of water. Water works as a medium to soften the rigid edges of these prints, and in some cases, completely alter the reading. These film prints were used as physical filter on both facade to generate different phenomena. Black and white filters are more about form, and color filters about more about effect and phenomena. Thank you.
Yang-Fan, this has been great. You might want to say a word or two that kind of helps contextualize the way in which you imagine working on the project going forward and the scale of working. I think you described some of your process of image making quite well, but if you want to help the jurors a bit by giving them some just facts on the ground about what you think you want to be doing going forward.
Okay. I think the program for the liminal space would be a greenhouse, and it's produced effect is derived from this image overlay, and through the and by using the capture image as a kind of filter to reproduce such effect.
I think these images you've produced on the right hand side are really interesting. Just the sort of idea of like reimagining or re-understanding the building itself through these images. I'm curious if moving forward you plan on sort of using the architecture as is and sort of adding greenhouse elements into it, or if you're imagining that these sort of filters or the sort of filtered images that you've produced could start to speak to maybe a sort of like armature or something around the building that would start to like transform how it's understood from the street.
Yeah, I think by using the photographic image as a generative system to produce reading, most of the effect is it's about the street facing side, where on Arlington it's more about reflection, and on like West 18th Street, the main facade of the building is more about seeing through, and it has like reflection and projection at the same time.
So I guess maybe to rephrase the question to be a little bit more specific, what do you imagine the sort of your interventions on the building being moving forward?
Intervention on the building, I think it stays mostly from on the exterior, and to extract the elements that's being registered on the facade, and to expand the layers into such liminal space construction.
Yang-Fan, I put a link to in the mural in the chat, which is an exhibition that Charles Gaines did in 2007. I think it says there in a local gallery here in LA, and And it was wonderful from that exhibit was that he created this smoke machine where he shifted statistical data, which was like a measuring of the pollution, levels of pollution every day in LA. And the smoke machine will produce more smoke if there was more smoke that day and less smoke, meaning that if LA was clean, was like San Francisco forest, like clean air, you will have no installation. So the worst days of the city were the most beautiful days for the installation. And it created this blur. You can see in the photo. I don't think the photo is, it's a really small image. You might find other ones, but it blurred the transparency. I think his tree drawings are so beautiful. All his work is quite amazing, but I wonder whether that liminal space, that space that you have in between, similar to his cage of smoke, his kind of fog machine. There's something, that it's not only a greenhouse, but, what it is, it's an alternative landscape, it's an alternative space. This building being abandoned, yet you're not going to recover the building, you're leaving it as it is. But you're creating a buffer zone between the abandoned building and the street, which is now I saw as a chain link fence. So meaning that you have a chain link fence and then you have a facade. That's your gap, from those two. So I think you have to think carefully about that, and I think that, it might go even conceptual, like this example that I was telling you of how, of like compressing an atmosphere, like you have a space inside of there. And then would there be real nature? Would there be projected nature? What is the role of nature in that site? I think there are many questions. I mean, I wish the project was more advanced at this stage because we are midterm review. So I think that we need a fast answer to your questions. And definitely what you would have is that you would have a movie. I mean, I think it would have been great today to see a movie of this, of how you see through, you see through a building to, sorry. You see through a building, to a space. So I think that, or another example might be more literal. I'll put it in the chat. The best supermarkets had, one of the options that they had is that they had like a jungle space in between the generic space of the supermarket and the outside boundary of the building. And so I wonder, what is that space in between? Again, should be more advanced today, but I would say, no, he has until Monday to really make a decision on that. And then the means of representation. Is this a movie? Is this a series of images? It is like Charles Gaines, it's like transparent film, like his tree paintings that are like transparent, medium. I think you have to choose that.
I absolutely agree. I think that the visual material you produce, Yongfen, is really provocative. I think that it's authentic. I think that you've done it in your own manner, and I think that it sets up a pretty high sort of desire for us in the way that you start advancing the project to the next level. Yeah, right. You know that you need to be more further along than you are right now, but given where you are, I think that I would encourage you to think quite literally about the material in front of you. How do you imagine this material to become quite literally at the scale of the site, and not something that is a sort of small device, but actually something much larger. And I think that I would start literal. I wouldn't try and, you've already produced so much and this is your own content. So how do you start to measure it? I think that's how do you start to construct it such that you can start to make an argument for it kind of architecturally. I think that the Charles Gaines reference and the kind of conceptual kind of turn is a really interesting one too. I think that you have done a lot of reading and research and have also have a lot of intuition about the site. So there's maybe something that you can be thinking about as condensing the work and the relationship to the landscape that is both highly visual and literal based on the films and the idea of these planes that you would be erecting in front of. I'm imagining you're basically producing a sort of architecture that is erected in front of the existing building. But I think the question of what is it? Is it measuring? Is it recording? That I think is a kind of a nice add to the conversation today.
I sent you, Young Fan, I just sent you the best site design James Wine's project. The one I mentioned in particular is the one that has the kind of nature. You see how it's been taking over some of the sketches that are there, in this kind of liminal space between, the interior to the exterior. So maybe you even do like a fake model. No, Mira, maybe there's like the James Wine's model, maybe there's a kind of, but it's digital, like it looks like a model, but it's digital, where you start to put what's happening there. And then this elevation visuals, almost as if you're driving around, and looking at this.
Yeah, I agree. I think constructing, I think that the Young Fund you've been pretty clear that you think it's not practical to make a elaborate physical model, but I do think trying to figure out a way to stage a digital model such that it sort of almost like a physical model seems like could be a good way to move it forward. So it's not trying to, it understands itself as an artifice in a way, I think could help in some capacity. So yeah. If there's any other, I think that we can close. Young Fan, if you want to add to this, but I really want to thank everybody for your time and for the day. The student work it's been great, and the conversation has been really robust. So thank you guys. If there's any other closing remarks, we are going to get back to the rest of the semester and head towards September.
Congrats, everyone.
Exactly. Thank you, Natu. Thank you, Nate. Thank you, everybody and all the students. And yeah, now we're moving forward to our final step, to our destination. So, good luck, everybody.
Great work.
Thank you. See all the
Thanks, you guys.
See where it ends up.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.